The chief's daughter is dying. The shaman has already sent her spirit to the ancestors. But a naked stranger, who only arrived at the camp yesterday, sits down beside her and gives the child plain salt water to drink. The whole clan watches as he seems to lose his mind. No one knows that this water saves millions of children. In the world from which he came, and just a day ago, this stranger was dying himself. The cold had frozen his body into a single block of ice. Li Changwu had time to think only one thing. I won't even be afraid. Then darkness. Then wet grass stings his cheek. The smell of rot twists his stomach, and the blunt end of a spear jabs him in the ribs. Changwu opens his eyes. A man with a spear stands over him. The tip is stone. The engineer's brain kicks in before his human instincts. Oxygen, swamp, no metal. This isn't a reenactment. No reenactor smells like this. Changwu sits up. Every muscle screams. He is naked in the middle of a foreign forest. The man with the spear growls words Changwu has never heard in 29 years. He raises his palms. I am unarmed. And then he sees the wound on the savage's arm. Ragged edges, redness creeping upward. Pus. This wound will kill him in a week. Changwu pokes at the wound. He pokes himself in the chest. He shakes his head at the spear. I'm not an enemy. I'll help. The savage stares at him for a long time, like a beast that hasn't decided whether to run or bite. Then he lowers his spear. Changwu exhales. He's alive. Changwu stands up. His knees are shaking. A stream is 3 steps away. He drinks the icy sweet water, free of chlorine and iron. Just water. He beats his chest. Changwu. The savage is silent. Then he answers. Toru. Changwu points to the wound, to the water, to the fire. Toru looks at him like he's an idiot, but unties the pot. Changwu gathers branches. Toru strikes 3 times to start a fire. The water boils. Changwu takes Toru's hand and washes away the pus with boiling water. Toru hisses through clenched teeth but doesn't pull his hand away. Changwu finds sphagnum moss by the stream, marsh moss that absorbs the pus and kills the infection. He applies it. He wraps it with bark. Toru twists his hand. He looks at the bandage. He looks at the stranger, and his face changes. Not gratitude, understanding. A naked, frozen stranger has done something useful. Toru rips the leather cloak from his shoulders and tosses it to him. It stinks so badly it brings tears to his eyes, but it's warm. Let's go. They walk for an hour. The forest parts. A dozen skin huts surround a campfire. 50 people, all of them dirty, all thin, all staring at the naked stranger. Not a single friendly glance. A man by the fire grabs a spear. The chief emerges from the large hut, a head taller than everyone else, feathers stuck in his beard, claws and bones around his neck. He steps right up close and jabs Changwu in the chest with a finger as hard as a stone. Changwu does not back down. If you back down before the chief in front of the clan, they will drive you away. And to drive a naked man away in this forest means to kill him, just more slowly. The chief grunts. He utters a word. Toru drags the stranger into a hut on the edge and tosses him an armful of grass. Sleep. Changwu lies in the darkness and counts. Stone tools, rough clay, no weaving, no metal. This is the Stone Age. And in his head, he has 20 years of study and 2 college degrees. He knows how to boil water and why, how to build a clay oven, how to find copper ore, how to build a smelter, how to grow barley, how to deliver a baby without killing the mother. This knowledge is worth more than all the gold in the world. But there's a problem. He has no language. He can't explain anything to them. Not yet. So first, learn the language. Second, become useful before they kill him. Third, don't show too much at once. Those who perform miracles become gods or sacrifices. Both end badly. One step at a time, quietly, like building a bridge. A howl comes from the forest. A wolf, or something bigger. Changwu doesn't sleep that night. but he survives. The morning begins with a scream, a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate. Chang-woo crawls outside. The entire camp is gathered near the chieftain's tent. A woman is rocking back and forth on the ground. In her arms is a girl of about 6. Her body is limp as a rag doll. Her face is gray. Chang-woo sits down. Her skin is dry and hot. Her lips are cracked. Her eyes are sunken. Her stomach is swollen. There are traces of diarrhea on her skin. Dehydration. Without treatment, the child will die within a day. A shaman dressed in bones and feathers emerges from the hut. His face is smeared with red clay. He waves a smoking bundle of grass over the girl and mutters. He finishes. He stands up. He says a few words to the chief. Chang-woo doesn't know the language, but reads everything on their faces. The girl will die. The spirits are taking her. Let her go. The chief stands like a statue, but his fists are clenched. She is his daughter. Chang-woo stands up. He has an hour, maybe 2. After that, no amount of water will bring the girl back. He takes the largest bowl. He scoops up water. He sets it over the fire. The whole clan is watching. The shaman watches. The chief watches. Chang-woo takes a pinch of salt from a pouch by the entrance, a pinch of ash from the fire. The water boils. He throws in the salt. He throws in the ash. He stirs with a stick. Oral rehydration. A liter of water. 3 grams of salt. Ash instead of baking soda. This solution saves millions of children in his world. Here, no one knows about it. Chang-woo sits down next to the mother. He drips the solution onto the girl's tongue. She swallows reflexively. The swallowing reflex is working. It's not too late. The shaman steps forward and barks. Chang-woo doesn't turn around. The shaman shouts louder. Chang-woo doesn't turn around. Toru steps between them and holds out his hand. The shaman falls silent, but his gaze promises a conversation, a long and unpleasant one. Chang-woo drips the solution all day, a spoonful every few minutes. She boils fresh water, measures out the salt, measures out the ash, drips, waits, drips again. Her mother sits nearby and doesn't leave. The chief comes every hour, stands, watches, leaves. After midnight, the girl opens her eyes. She stares blankly at the stranger. She turns her head toward her mother and falls asleep again. But this is a different sleep, not a failure. The sleep of a child who has begun to fight. By morning, she opens her eyes again and says one word. Chang-woo doesn't understand, but her mother does, and she doubles over, sobbing. The girl asks for food. It works. The chief arrives at dawn. He watches as his daughter eats meat from her mother's hands. He sits down across from the stranger. He is silent for a long time. He removes from his neck a small bone amulet, polished to a shine, his father's amulet. He places it on the ground in front of Chang-woo and says one word. Chang-woo does not know it, but he recognizes it by the sound. Like a stone laid in the foundation, heavy and forever. In 2 weeks, he will understand what it meant. Stay. For the first few days, Chang-woo did nothing but 2 things. He listened and memorized. He followed Toru like a shadow. He sat beside him when he ate. He stood beside him when he worked. Toru sharpened the tip and spoke aloud what he was doing. Stone, strike, sharp. Chang-woo repeated every word. There was nowhere to write it down. The wrist notebook was dead glass on his wrist. So he made notches on a thin stick. 1 notch, 1 word. He attached a sound from his memory to each notch. After 3 days, he had 40 words. Water, fire, stone, meat, eat, drink, sleep, walk, big, small, good, bad, woman, man, child, beast. In a week, 120. In 2 weeks, he could form simple sentences. Hot water is good. Dirty wound is bad. That was enough to survive, but not enough to explain. The Black Otter clan lived by simple rules. Men hunted, women gathered, the elders repaired and taught. Children helped everyone. Whoever didn't hunt or gather ate last. Chang Wu didn't know how to hunt. A spear in his hands was a useless stick. He couldn't draw a bow. Physically, he couldn't. An engineer's body is not a hunter's body. His hands were used to precision tools, not weapons. His feet were used to smooth floors, not forest trails. He ran slower than any teenager in the clan. So he ate last, gnawed bones with scraps of meat, tough roots that the women tossed into the communal pot, sometimes a handful of berries if the day had been good. Constant hunger became the backdrop of his life, like the sound of a stream behind the camp. It's always there, and over time, you stop noticing it. But he didn't waste time. Every day he did something small and useful. On the fourth day, he examined everyone he could, not with words, with gestures. He pointed to himself. He pointed to Tora's arm, which was healing cleanly and quickly. Then he pointed to a person. "Do you want me to take a look?" 4 agreed. One had a cut on his leg that was already scabbed over, but dirty. Chang Wu boiled some water and washed it out. Another had an old dislocated finger. The finger jutted out at a wrong angle, and the man had gotten used to not using it. Chang Wu took his hand. He looked the man in the eyes. He pointed at the finger. Then he jerked it sharply. A crack. The man yelped, but the finger snapped back into place. Chang Wu made a splint out of 2 sticks and tied it with a strip of leather. A week later, the man moved his finger for the first time in 2 years. The third was a woman with an abscess on her back. Large, red, hot to the touch. The shaman had treated her with smoke and incantations. It didn't help. The abscess grew. Chang Wu boiled some water. He heated a sharp flint shard over the fire. It wasn't a scalpel, but it was the best he could find. The woman lay on her stomach. 2 other women held her by the shoulders. Chang Wu made an incision. Pus gushed out. The smell was so bad that one of the women holding her turned away. Chang Wu washed and washed. Then he applied a sphagnum moss compress and bandaged the wound. 3 days later, the swelling had gone down. A week later, the woman got up and went to gather roots with the others. The 4th was a child. A boy of about 4 with a crooked leg. Not a fracture. Rickets. Lack of sunlight and lack of nutrition. Chang Wu looked at the leg and realized it was already too late to fix it. The bone had grown crooked. He needed calcium and vitamin D 3 years ago. Now it was too late. He crouched down in front of the boy. The boy looked at him without fear. Children hadn't yet learned to fear strangers. Chang Wu ruffled his hair. He showed the mother how to massage the area so the muscles around the bone would strengthen. It wouldn't cure it, but the boy would walk more confidently. The mother watched his hands and memorized every movement. That's how the first week passed. Shaman Park Dohwan watched all this in silence. He didn't approach them. He didn't say a word directly to Chang Wu. But Chang Wu saw how he spoke to people after each healing. He approached them. He spoke quietly. He shook his head. He pointed to the sky. Chang Wu didn't hear what he was saying, but he guessed. The spirits do not approve. A stranger will bring trouble. His miracles are a deception. Or worse, his miracles are real, but they are stolen from the spirits, and a price will have to be paid for them. Among those listening to the shaman was So Mira. Chang Wu noticed her on the 2nd day. A quiet girl who followed Park Dohwan just as he himself had followed Tora. She carried his bags of herbs. She ground roots for him in a stone mortar. She listened when he spoke and nodded without interrupting. The shaman's apprentice. But Chang Wu noticed something else. When he was washing a wound or lancing an abscess, So Mi stood closer than the others. And she wasn't just watching, she was squinting, leaning forward, trying to make out exactly what he was doing. Her eyesight was poor. She couldn't see clearly beyond 10 paces, but up close, she saw everything, and she memorized it. Chang Wu realized this when he saw her sorting through her herbs the next day and setting aside the sphagnum, the very same moss he had used for the bandage. She hadn't gathered it before. It wasn't on the shaman's list of herbs. Now she was gathering it. She was learning, silently, behind the teacher's back. Chang Wu pretended not to notice. In time. Everything in time. On the 10th day, he was summoned to the council. Council is a grand word for it. 5 men by the fire. Chief Han Tegu, his brother, 2 senior hunters, and the shaman, Pak No He. Chan Wu led Toru in and stood behind him. The chief spoke. Chan Wu caught only a word here and there, but the general meaning was clear. Winter, food, not enough. People, many, an extra mouth to feed, a decision. The chief asked what to do with the stranger. The shaman spoke first. He spoke at length. Chang Wu caught familiar words among the unfamiliar ones. Spirits, anger, leave, danger. The meaning was clear. The stranger must leave. The spirits are displeased. His presence will bring trouble. One of the elder hunters nodded. Another stared into the fire and said nothing. The chief's brother was silent too. With Toru behind him, Chang Wu shifted from foot to foot. Then silence fell, and everyone looked at Chang Wu. He stood up. His mind was racing. Few words, many gestures. He had to show, not say, show. He walked over to the fire. He picked up a clay bowl. He scooped up some water. He placed it over the fire. Everyone watched. When the water boiled, Chang Wu pointed at the bubbles. Then he pointed at the chief's daughter, who was sitting by the tent, chewing on a strip of dried meat. Alive, healthy, chewing meat, because of this water, hot water. Then he pointed to Tora's hand, clean, healing, because of this water. Then he pointed to the woman with the former abscess who was just passing by with a basket of roots, walking, working, because of this water. 3 lives, 1 bowl, 1 simple thing. Chang Wu looked at the chief and spoke in their language, awkwardly but clearly. I am useful. Chief Han Tegu looked at him. Then he looked at his daughter, then at Tora, then back at Chang Wu, and he nodded. With a single movement of his head, the shaman stood up and left without saying a word. His back was straight and stiff. So Mira stood behind the tent and heard everything. When the shaman walked past her, she bowed her head as she always did. But when he was gone, she raised her eyes and looked toward Chang Wu for a long time. Then she turned away and went to grind the roots. Chang Wu had earned the right to stay. Now the real work. That same evening, he sat by the fire and used a stick to draw a rectangle on the packed earth, then a circle around it, then an arrow from the circle to the rectangle. Toru sat nearby and watched. What is this? Chang Wu pointed to the largest pot in the camp, then to his drawing. Then he cupped his hands around an imaginary object, making it bigger. Big, very big. Clay. Fire. A big thing for the fire. Toru frowned. Then his face cleared. He pointed to the hearth. Chang Wu shook his head. Not a hearth. Better than a hearth. He stood up and walked to the edge of the camp. He found a patch of clay soil by the stream. He crouched down. He picked up a lump of clay. He kneaded it in his hands. Good clay, dense, low in sand. You can build with this. He began to mold a small model, a base, walls, a draft hole at the bottom, a dome on top, a hole for smoke, a kiln. The simplest shaft kiln. They built these 5,000 years ago in his world, for firing pottery, for smelting copper if they found ore, for heating if they made the right chimney. This isn't just a campfire in the center of the camp where half the heat escapes into the sky. This is directed heat, controlled temperature. The first step from fire to technology. Toru looked at the clay model. He ran his finger along the walls, peered into the openings. Then he looked at Chang Wu. And in his gaze, Chang Wu read the same thing he had seen when he was bandaging his arm. Not admiration, not fear, understanding. This stranger knows something, something big, something important, and he's ready to show it. Chang Wu kneaded another lump of clay and handed it to Toru. He showed him how to shape a wall. Toru took the clay and began to mold it. His fingers were rough and accustomed to stone and bone, but they quickly learned the new motion. The next morning, Chang Wu and Toru began building a kiln. A real one, full scale. They built the oven for 7 days. Chang Wu chose a spot 20 paces from the camp on a small hill. It wasn't by chance. The hill provided a natural slope for the draft. The wind blew from the west here, and he directed the draft opening westward so the wind would help the fire. On the first day, they dug a pit for the foundation. Chang Wu and Toru. Then another hunter arrived, a young man named Yuck. He didn't speak to Chang Wu. He just came and started digging. On the third day, a woman joined them, the very one whose abscess Chang Wu had lanced. She brought clay, lots of clay, 2 heavy leather sacks. She dropped them by the pit and left without saying a word. On the 4th day, another woman arrived with 2 sacks. Chang Wu hadn't asked for help. People came on their own. He built the walls from a mixture of clay and small stones, layer by layer. Each layer dried for a day before Chang Wu laid the next. He knew he couldn't rush. If the clay didn't dry, the wall would crack at the first firing, and all the work would be ruined. Toru helped silently and patiently. He didn't ask questions. He just did what Chang Wu showed him. He molded, he smoothed, he waited, he molded again. Komira came every evening. She would sit off to the side and watch the kiln grow. She brought a mortar with roots and ground them while she watched. She pretended to be busy with her own work, but her eyes were fixed on the kiln. On the 7th day, the kiln was ready. Not very tall, just a little above the knee of an adult man. The walls were as thick as a palm. 2 openings, the lower one for draft, the upper one for smoke to escape and for loading. Inside, a firebox and a stone shelf on which to place whatever needed to be fired. Chang Wu let it dry for 2 more days. Then he lit the first fire inside. A small one, cautious. First, a bundle of dry grass, then thin twigs, then thicker branches. The temperature must be raised slowly. If you heat wet clay too quickly, the moisture inside will boil and tear the walls apart. Chang Wu spent the whole day by the kiln. He added fuel a pinch at a time. He watched the smoke. When the smoke became steady and clear, it meant the walls had dried out from the inside. He could add more. By evening, the kiln hummed with a steady, low sound. The walls were red hot. You could feel the heat just a few steps away. Toru stood nearby, staring at the fire inside the kiln as if spellbound. He had seen fire every day of his life, but this fire was different. It didn't spread across the ground. It didn't flicker in the wind. It sat inside the walls and worked. The next morning, Chang Wu let the kiln cool down. He inspected the walls. Not a single crack. The clay had baked and become hard as stone. The kiln worked. Now he needed pots. Chang Wu went to the stream and gathered some clay. Different clay, fatter, more pliable. He needed it for a long time. He removed the pebbles. He added fine sand, not much. 1 handful of sand for every 4 handfuls of clay. The sand is needed so the pot doesn't burst during firing. Without sand, the clay shrinks unevenly and cracks. With sand, the shrinkage is more even. He molded the first pot in front of everyone, on purpose. He sat down by the fire in the center of the camp and began to work. The women dropped what they were doing and came over. The children sat around him. Even the men were watching. Chang Wu made the pot using the simplest method, the coil technique. He rolled the clay into a long sausage. He laid it in rings, 1 ring on top of another. He smoothed the walls with his wet fingers, slowly, evenly. The pot grew before their eyes, round, with a wide mouth and a stable base. When he finished, the pot was the size of a human head, larger than any bowl in the camp. The women exchanged glances. One reached out and touched the side of the pot, gently, as if touching something alive. Chang Wu let the pot dry for a day. Then he placed it in the kiln on a stone shelf. He lit the fire. He raised the temperature slowly. 3 hours, 4, 5. By evening, he took it out. The pot was reddish-brown, hard. He tapped it with his knuckle, and the pot rang out. A clear, even ring. No bowl in the camp had such density or such strength. Their dishes were hastily molded and dried by the fire. They cracked, they leaked, it crumbled. This pot was different. Chang Wu filled it with water and set it on the coals. The water boiled. He removed the pot from the fire with his bare hands, wrapping them in a strip of hide. The pot didn't crack, it didn't burst, it didn't leak. Chief Han Tegu approached. He took the pot. He turned it over in his hands. He tapped it with his finger. He heard a ringing sound. He looked at Chang Wu and said 1 word that Chang Wu already knew. Good. Over the next 3 days, Chang Wu made 5 more pots, different sizes. Then he sat by the fire and showed the 3 women how to shape the clay. Slowly, step by step, we roll out the clay like this. We place the ring like this. Smooth it out like this. The women tried. The first pots were crooked, lopsided, with thin walls in one place and thick in another. Chang Wu didn't criticize. He showed them again, and again, and again. By the end of the week, one of the women had made a pot almost as smooth as his first one. She held it in her hands and looked at it with an expression as if she had just given birth. Chang Wu smiled, for the first time in 3 weeks in this world. The kiln and the pots changed life in the camp faster than he had expected. Before, they cooked food in old bowls that held a little. Now the large pot allowed them to cook for the entire clan at once. Before, the water cooled quickly. Now the thick walls of the new pot kept the heat for hours. Before, there was nothing to store supplies in. The pots would crack, grains and roots would get wet and moldy. Now the fired pots with tight-fitting lids kept everything dry. The women were the first to realize this. They realized it faster than the men, because it was the women who fiddled with food and water and storage every day. And it was they who first felt the difference. A week after the first pot, the clan's elder woman, the chieftain's mother, approached Chang Wu. She was nearly 50, and in this world that meant advanced age. Her face was wrinkled, her back was bent, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She placed a piece of the best meat in front of him. Not scraps, not bones, meat. A real piece of venison with fat. Chang Wu looked at the meat. He looked at the old woman. She nodded. Eat. Chang Wu ate and tried not to cry, because he couldn't remember the last time he'd been so hungry, or the last time food meant more than just food. It was an acknowledgement, not from the chief, not from the council, from the woman who decided every day who in the clan would get the best cut. And today, she decided he deserved it. Shaman Park Dohwan saw the changes too, and he didn't like them. Chang Wu felt it every day. Little things. One of the men would suddenly stop coming to the hearth. One of the women would give up learning to sculpt. In the morning, a bundle of some herbs tied with red thread appeared at the entrance to Chang Wu's hut. Toru saw it first. He picked it up. He sniffed it. His face grew serious. He said one word. Shaman. Chang Wu asked what it meant. Toru explained as best he could. A warning. The spirits see. The spirits are displeased. If the stranger doesn't stop, the spirits will punish him. Not him, the whole clan. Chang Wu silently took the bundle of herbs and threw it into the fire. Toru looked at him with wide eyes. Then he laughed, a short, nervous laugh, and said nothing. That night, Chang Wu lay in his hut and thought. A shaman is dangerous, not because he is evil, but because he believes sincerely. Park Dohwan isn't pretending. He truly believes that spirits exist and that Chang Wu is offending them. And half the clan believes him, because they've believed him their whole lives. You can't fight him head on. You can't tell people that the shaman is wrong. You can't say that spirits don't exist. It's like walking into a temple and spitting on the altar. They'd kill him before he could finish the sentence. Something else is needed. People need to see for themselves. Not hear it from Chang Wu, but see it with their own eyes. That the water they boil doesn't kill but saves. That the pots he makes don't anger the spirits but feed them. That every action of his is not an insult but a gift. Time. He needs time. And he needs So Mira. So Mira came to him on her own. It happened 3 days after Chang Wu threw the shaman's bundle of herbs into the kiln. It was evening. The camp was quieting down. The hunters had returned with their catch. 2 deer. A good day. People ate their fill, and laughter rang out by the fire. A rare sound in a clan where every day could be their last. Chang Wu sat by his kiln, shaping a new pot. A large one. The largest he had ever made. It would hold enough water to quench the thirst of half the clan at once. He heard footsteps and looked up. So Mi stood 5 paces away from him. She was holding a bundle of moss in her hands, sphagnum, the very same kind. She held it out to Chang Wu and said 2 words, for wounds. Chang Wu took the moss. He looked at her. She didn't lower her gaze. It took effort. He could see how tense her shoulders were, how her fingers clenched the edge of her cloak. A shaman's apprentice had come to the man the shaman had declared an enemy. This wasn't just a step, it was a leap across an abyss. Chang Wu nodded and pointed to the ground beside him. "Sit down." She sat down, and they were silent for a luck. Then Chang Wu took a stick and drew a circle on the ground. He pointed to the pot of boiling water. Then he drew little dots inside the circle. Lots of dots. He pointed to the dirty water in the bowl nearby. Then he erased the dots inside the circle. He pointed to the boiling water. Hot water kills the little things. The little things are bad. Somi looked at the drawing. She squinted. Then she pointed at the dots and asked, "What is this?" Chang Wu thought for a moment. How do you explain microbes to someone who has never even seen a magnifying glass? He gestured with his fingers to something tiny, smaller than a grain of sand, smaller than dust. So small that the eyes can't see it, but it exists. It lives in dirty water. It lives on dirty hands. It gets inside the body and makes you sick. Hot water kills it. So Mira listened. Her face was serious and focused. Then she asked, choosing her words slowly so he would understand. "My mother. She died while giving birth. The shaman said the spirits took her. The little evil one. It could have taken her too." Chan Wu looked at her. The question in her eyes was older than she was. That question had lived inside her since childhood. Since the day her mother died because the shaman forbade boiling water during childbirth. Because spirits live in damp water. Because boiling water kills them and they take revenge. Chang Wu couldn't lie. Not to her. He nodded. Yes. The little evil one gets inside when a woman gives birth. If the water is dirty, if the hands are dirty, hot water could help. Somi was silent for a long time. Her fingers stopped clenching the edge of her shawl. They lay on her knees, palms open and facing up, as if she had let something go, or accepted something. Then she said quietly, "Teach me." Chan Wu nodded. From that evening on, Somi came every day. He taught her everything he could explain with words and gestures. He showed her how to boil water for washing wounds, how to make a sphagnum moss compress, how to tell a clean wound from an infected one by its color and smell, how to wash her eyes with chamomile tea that she herself had found by the river. She remembered everything the first time. Her memory was flawless. He taught her bread of the valley's plants, and she knew each one by sight, by smell, by taste. Now new knowledge was being added to this. Boil, wash, dry in the sun, warm. Don't touch the wound with dirty hands. Simple rules. So simple that every time Chang Wu spoke them, he felt a strange bitterness. Millions of people in his world had died because no one knew these simple rules. Billions, over the course of millennia. And here he is, sitting on the ground in the Stone Age, explaining to a young woman that she needs to wash her hands before touching a wound. And she looks at him as if he were the person who opened the door to a room she had suspected existed her whole life but could never find the entrance to. Alongside teaching So Mira, Chang Wu took on another project, the well. The Black Otter clan drew water from the stream. The stream was 100 paces from the camp. The water in it was clean, but the stream was getting shallower with each passing week. Autumn was turning to winter, and the water was running low. And further upstream, Chang Wu found a spot where people were relieving themselves. Not everyone, but enough. Feces were getting into the water. The water carried them downstream, right to where the clan collected water to drink. Chang Wu stood on the bank and watched this, feeling the engineering part of his brain scream in horror. They were drinking their own waste. Every day. Their whole lives. And they're dying from it. And they don't know why. He found a spot for a well on the opposite side of the camp, higher up on the slope. The groundwater here should be clean. He checked in the simplest way possible. He dug into the ground to the depth of his hand. The soil was damp. Good. Water is close. He wasn't digging alone. Toru was helping. And Yuk. And two other men whose names Chang Wu already knew. They dug with stone shovels, slowly, with great effort. After a day and a half, the hole was waist-deep for an adult man. Water began to seep from the walls. Chang Wu lined the walls with stones so the soil wouldn't crumble. He packed moss and clay between the stones. He covered the bottom with fine river gravel. The gravel acts as a filter. Water passes through it and leaves behind larger impurities. Not ideal. Far from ideal. A real well needs to be dug deeper and lined with fired stone or brick, which they don't have. But even this is better than drinking from a stream where people defecate. When the well filled with water, Chang Wu scooped up the first bowl. The water was clear, odorless. He tasted it. Clean, cool, with a slight mineral aftertaste from the stones. Good water. He took the bowl to the chief. Han Tegu tasted it. He swirled the water in his mouth like a wine connoisseur. He looked at Chang Wu. Good. Then Chang Wu did what he should have done from the very beginning, but hadn't had the courage to say. He gathered the people around the fire. About 20 people. Those who were ready to listen. And he explained. Slowly. In simple words. Nature's call. To relieve oneself. Not by the stream. Far from the stream. Far from the well. Over there. He pointed to a spot down the slope, 50 paces from the camp. Where the ground is soft and where rainwater flows away from the camp, not toward it. There's a hole there. A big hole. Go there. Only there. People exchanged glances. Some smirked. A strange stranger, telling them where to go to relieve themselves. But Toru didn't smirk. Toru showed his healed hand and spoke briefly. He knows. Listen. Not everyone listened, but many did. Enough. Chan Wu dug the pit himself, deep as a man is tall. He lined the edges with poles so it wouldn't crumble. He made a simple platform out of thick branches, 2 poles for the feet, a hole in the middle. The first outhouse in the history of this world with minimal construction. He placed a pot of ash nearby. He showed them that after each use, they needed to throw a handful of ash inside. The ash suppresses the smell and accelerates decomposition. It's not a sewer system. It's not even a normal toilet, but it's the first step. Separating waste from water, separating sickness from health. So Mira helped explain. She already understood why. The little bad thing. It lives in the dirt. The dirt gets into the water gets into the body gets sick. She explained it to the other women in her own words, gently, patiently, in a language they understood better than Chang Wu's broken phrases. And the women listened to her, because So-mi was one of them, not an outsider, not a stranger, their own girl who had grown up among them, who knew their names and the names of their children. And if she says the stranger is right, then maybe he really is right. Shaman Park No-hei heard about the pit and the well. He came to the well. He looked at the water. Then he looked at Chang Wu. Then he looked at So-mi, who was standing nearby. His gaze on his student was such that Chang Wu felt a chill run down his spine. It was not the gaze of a teacher upon a student. It was the gaze of an owner upon an object being stolen from him. Park No-hei turned and walked away, silently, not a word. But Chang Wu knew that a shaman's silence was more dangerous than his shout. A shout is an emotion. Silence is a plan. Winter fell upon the valley like a slab of stone. Overnight, the temperature plummeted, and by morning, the puddles by the stream were covered with a crust of ice as thick as a finger. The wind from the north blew incessantly. There was no snow yet, but the air had become so dry and cold that the skin on his hands cracked until it bled. Chang Wu woke up because he couldn't feel his toes. The hut was drafty right through. The animal hides on the walls were thin and poorly fitted together. The gaps were a finger's width wide. The wind whistled through them and blew out the last of the warmth. His first thought was practical. Warmth. Now. Immediately. He went outside. The camp was quiet. People sat in their huts, huddling around their small hearths. Smoke crept along the ground. Chang Wu went to his stove. It stood cold. He lit a fire inside. When the walls warmed up, he stood nearby and warmed his hands. Then he began to think. The stove was working, but it stood outside. Its heat was escaping into the air. That was a waste. He needed a stove inside the dwelling, with a chimney that draws the smoke outside but keeps the heat inside. The simplest fireplace, or even simpler, a clay stove in the corner of the hut with a clay pipe through the roof. He drew with a stick on the frozen ground and calculated the size of the stove, the thickness of the walls, the length of the pipe, the diameter of the draft hole. If the pipe is too narrow, the smoke will go inside. If it's too wide, the heat will escape outside along with the smoke. A balance is needed. Toru approached. He looked at the sketch. Chanwoo explained. A stove, inside the house. The heat stays, the smoke goes up. Toru nodded. He had already not to ask unnecessary questions. If a stranger says it will be warm, then it will be warm. They started with the chief's tent, not out of sycophancy, out of logic. If the chief sees it works, the others will want one too. Changwoo built the stove right inside the tent, a small one, about the size of 2 pots stacked together. Thick walls, a small firebox so as not to waste extra firewood. He made the chimney out of strips of birch bark rolled into a tube and coated with clay. The birch bark will burn if the clay cracks, but if the clay withstands the first firing, it will harden and become a self-supporting pipe. Risky, but there were no other materials for the pipe. He lit a fire in the stove, a small one. The smoke rose up the pipe and escaped through a hole in the roof of the hut. There was no smoke inside the hut. Warmth began to fill the space, slowly, gently, not like an open fire that burns on one side and leaves cold on the other, but evenly, from all sides. The walls of the oven heated up and began to give off warmth. The chieftain's wife entered the hut. She stopped. She looked around. Then she looked at Changwoo, and she cried. She just stood there and cried, because she was warm. For the first time since the beginning of winter, she was warm and didn't have to sit huddled over smoldering coals and breathe in the smoke. Little Han Yuna, the chief's daughter, the very one Changwoo had saved with the solution, ran up to the stove and pressed her palms against the warm wall. She laughed. She said something to her mother. Her mother laughed through her tears. Changwoo didn't understand the words, but he understood that the child had said something simple and good, something like, "It's warm," or "nice." Chief Han Taegu entered the tent that evening. He sat down by the stove. He placed his hand on it. He felt the warmth. He looked at the chimney. There was no smoke inside. He looked at Changwoo and said a word that Changwoo already knew well. More. Make more. Changwoo nodded. Over the next 10 days, he installed stoves in every hut in the camp. 12 stoves. Toru helped. Yuk helped. 2 women mixed the clay. The boys hauled birch bark for the chimneys. The work was hard. The clay froze quickly in the cold. They had to keep it by the fire so it would stay pliable. Changwoo's fingers were bloodied. His nails were broken. The skin on his palms was cracked. An engineer's body isn't built for 10 hours of physical labor a day in the cold. But he worked, because every evening, when he finished another stove and lit a fire in it, people looked at the warmth as if they were looking at a miracle. Not magic, a miracle in its true sense. At something that changes lives and that you can touch with your hands. One stove didn't work. The third one, the chimney cracked on the very first evening. Smoke poured into the hut. People ran out, coughing. Shaman Pak No Hei stood by his hut and watched. He didn't smile. But he didn't hide his satisfaction either. There, the spirits had punished them. Changwoo took apart the chimney. He made a new one, thicker, with a double layer of clay. This time he added finely chopped dry grass to the clay. Straw in clay acts like rebar in concrete. It keeps the cracks from spreading. The new chimney held up. And the 4th, and the 5th, and all the rest. When the last stove was installed, Changwoo sat by the fire in the center of the camp. It was dark. The stars hung low and bright. He had never seen a sky like this in his life. There were no stars in Seoul. Light pollution had killed them long before he was born. Here, the sky was alive. The Milky Way stretched across it like a white river. He needed to think about the next step. Food. The stoves and pots had solved the problem of heat and storage. But food remained a problem. The hunters were venturing farther and farther. The deer had gone north. Small game was becoming increasingly scarce. The supplies of jerky were dwindling. The roots and berries ran out with the first frosts. The clan was heading into a hungry winter. Just like every winter before. And just like every winter, Some would not live to see spring. The old, the sick, weak children. They are taken to the hill, left without a fire in the first blizzard. And everyone pretends that this is how it must be, that the spirits have decided, that the beast is hungry and needs a sacrifice. Chan Yu clenched his teeth. No, not this year, not in his camp, he thought. What could he do about food right now, in winter when nothing grows and the game is gone? Traps. He could make traps for small game, snares made of sinew and thin ropes. Hunters knew about snares, but primitive ones. A snare on the trail and hope a hare gets caught in it. Chang Wu knew more complex designs, with a spring mechanism made from a bent branch, with bait, with several snares at once to increase the chances. He made the first trap in an hour. He showed it to Toru. Toru looked at the mechanism. He pressed the bait. The branch snapped back, and the loop tightened around his arm. He yanked his arm free and looked at Chang Wu with a respect that was almost comical. They set 20 traps around the camp. On the first night, they caught 3 hares. On the second night, 2 hares and a partridge. For a clan of 50 people, that's not much. But it was a supplement to what the hunters brought back. Every hare meant one more day without hunger for someone. Chang Wu showed the hunters how to make the traps. They learned quickly. By the end of the week, a network of 40 snares stood around the camp, checked every morning. The catch doubled. At the same time, Chang Wu turned his attention to another source of food: fish. The stream had run dry but hadn't frozen completely. Dark shadows moved beneath the ice. There were fish. The hunters didn't catch fish. They despised it. Fish was food for the weak, for those who couldn't kill a deer. Chang Wu had heard this and silently went about his business. He wove his first fish trap from thin willow twigs, a funnel-shaped trap. The fish swam in through a narrow opening but couldn't swim back out. He set it in the deepest part of the stream. In the morning, there were 6 fish in the trap. Small ones, each about the size of a palm. Chang Wu gutted them. He boiled them in a large pot of water. He added a pinch of salt and the wild garlic that So Mi had found at the edge of the forest. The broth turned out hot and thick. The smell was so strong that even those who had just said fish was food for the weak gathered around the fire. Chang Wu silently poured the broth into bowls. People drank. Hot, salty food on a cold day. They had never tasted anything more delicious. Not because the broth was a great culinary achievement, but because they were hungry, and it was hot, and it was filling, and there was enough of it. The next day, Toru went to the stream himself and checked the trap. There were 4 fish in it. He brought them back to camp and tossed them into the fire. Without a single word about food for the weak, from Mira, he helped Chan Wu gather herbs for the winter. She was drying chamomile, wormwood for intestinal parasites, mint for nausea, plantain for wounds. She knew plants better than he did, much better, 200 species, every one by heart. But now she knew not only which plants helped, but also why. Not because spirits live in chamomile, but because chamomile contains substances that reduce inflammation. She couldn't verify it, she couldn't see it, but she believed. Because everything else Chang Wu said turned out to be true. Boiled water saved the chieftain's daughter. The washed wound healed on Toru. The lanced abscess saved a woman. Pots don't crack. Stoves give off heat. Traps catch. So this must be true too. One evening, as they sat by the stove and So Mira sorted through dried herbs, she asked quietly, "Where are you from?" Chang Wu was silent for a long time. How to explain? From another world, from the future, from a place where people fly through the sky in metal birds and talk to each other through little glass plates. She wouldn't understand. Not because she's stupid. She's smarter than half the people he's known in his life. But there's a limit to what can be explained when the listener lacks the framework to understand. He answered simply, "Far away, very far away, a place where people know a lot, more than here. I came from there and can't go back." So Mi nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. Maybe she understood that he had said all he could. Maybe she understood that the details didn't matter right now. What mattered was that he was here, and that he was teaching, and that she was learning. A week after the start of winter, the first sick people arrived. Coughs, runny noses, fever, a common cold. In his world, it was an inconvenience. Here, it was a killer. A child with a cold could die within 3 days without treatment. An old person even faster. Chang Wu organized what in his world would be called an infirmary, a single hut, the one farthest from the center, with a stove inside, with a supply of boiled water, with clean rags for compresses. The sick were brought there. Mira took care of them. Chang Wu showed her what to do. Warm drinks, lots of fluids, rest, warmth, compresses on the forehead for high fevers, not cold compresses, warm ones. The body must fight it out on its own. Don't interfere, just support it. Of the first 5 patients, 4 were back on their feet within a week. The 5th was an old man with a long-standing cough that was most likely something worse than a cold. He didn't get up. Chang Wu sat by his side for 2 nights. He gave him water. He changed the compresses. On the 3rd night, the old man stopped breathing, quietly, without a struggle, like a man who had grown tired of walking and sat down to rest. Chang Wu sat next to the body and looked at his hands that had failed. He knew he couldn't save this man. Most likely it was tuberculosis, or something similar. Without antibiotics, without an X-ray, without an oxygen mask, he could only make the care easier. But knowing that didn't help. Toru found him in the morning, sitting by the body. Chang Wu sat motionless. His eyes were red. His face was gray. Toru sat down beside him. He was silent for a moment. Then he placed his hand on his shoulder, heavy, warm, and he said what people say in this world when someone passes away. The beast took him gently. Chang Wu didn't know if he believed in the beast, but he could feel the warmth of Toru's hand on his shoulder, and that was enough. Shaman Park. No-Hei came to take the body. It was his job. He prepared the dead for their departure, wrapped them in animal skins, placed a knife and a piece of meat beside them, sang a song over them that sent the spirit to the ancestors. Chang Wu stepped back, let the shaman do his work, didn't interfere, didn't argue. Park No-Hei noticed this. For the first time ever, he looked at Chang Wu not with hostility, but with something else. Not with warmth, not with acceptance, but at least with acknowledgement. The stranger wasn't trying to steal the dead. He took the living but left the dead to the spirits. It was a small thing, but in the war Chang Wu was waging not against a shaman, but against ignorance. Every small step mattered. Winter was deepening. The snow had finally come, white and thick. It covered the camp overnight. In the morning, the world was different, quiet, white, cold enough to make your lungs ache. The hunters went out and returned empty-handed more and more often. The game was hiding. The traps worked, but the hares were also becoming more cautious. The fish in the stream had gone deeper under the thick ice. Supplies were dwindling. Chang Wu counted. He always counted. Dried meat, enough for 20 days. Dried fish, enough for 10 days. Roots, enough for 5. Winter would last at least another 3 months. It wouldn't be enough, not nearly enough, he thought. He thought every night, lying by the stove, listening to the wind howling outside the walls of the hut. And he remembered, what could be eaten in winter? Bark. The inner layer of pine bark is edible. This isn't food, it's survival. But it has vitamin C and calories. Lichen. Some types of lichen are edible after long boiling. Acorns. If you soak them in running water for several days, they lose their bitterness and become mealy. You can make flatbreads out of them. He got to work. He showed the women how to peel off the inner layer of bark, how to crumble it into boiling water. The result was a porridge, tasteless, slippery, but it filled the stomach and gave strength. He showed them how to gather lichen from tree trunks, how to boil it for hours until it became gelatinous, how to add it to broth for thickness. He showed them how to gather acorns from under the snow, how to soak them in a stream in a leather bag, so the running water would wash out the tannins. After 5 days of soaking, the acorns became soft and almost free of bitterness. Chang Wu ground them between 2 stones. The result was coarse flour. From the flour, he made flatbreads. He baked them on the wall of the oven. They were flat and hard, but they were food, real food. Mensori. He heard that name for the first time in the middle of winter. Toru mentioned it when he was talking about the neighboring clans, the Low Water Clan. the poorest one. They live in the swamp. Mensori is the daughter of their elder. Toru said that the low-water clan starves more than the others. They always starve more than the others, because their land is a swamp. No hunting, no berries, just water and mud. Chan-Woo remembered that name, and he remembered the word swamp. A swamp isn't trash. A swamp is peat and black soil and water and dozens of plant species that grow only there. A swamp is future fields if you know how to drain them. But that's later, in the spring. Now it's winter, and they need to survive until spring. The Black Otter clan had survived, every single one of them. For the first time in 10 years, not a single child had died over the winter. Not a single old person had been laid to rest on the hill. When the first warm wind blew from the south and the snow began to settle, the chief knew. Spring had come with the scent of wet earth and the crackling of ice on the stream. The snow melted quickly. In 3 days, the clearing around the camp turned into a mess of mud and meltwater. But the people smiled. They had survived the winter, all of them. And this miracle was tangible. You could count it by the number of heads. 53 people had entered the winter. 53 came out. Chan-Woo didn't allow himself a moment's rest. Spring isn't a breather. Spring is the start. Everything he had planned while lying by the stove at night now had to be done. First, food. Not traps and not fish. Real food that grows from the ground. He had been waiting for this moment since day one. Back in the fall, before the snow, he had found what he was looking for. Wild grains were growing on the southern slope of the hill behind the camp. Thin stalks with small spikelets. He plucked a few and rubbed the grains between his fingers. Small, hard, but they were grains. Wild barley, or something so much like wild barley that the difference didn't matter. He gathered a handful of seeds then and hid them in a pot with a tight-fitting lid. All winter the pot stood by the stove in his hut. Dry, warm. The seeds waited. Now their time had come. Chan-Woo chose a patch of land south of the camp. Level, with a slight slope toward the stream. The soil here was dark and moist. A good sign. Dark soil means plenty of organic matter. Moist means water is nearby. He took the stone hoe that Toru had made according to his design during the last week of winter. A stick as long as an arm with a flat stone tied to the end with sinew. Rough, primitive, but enough to loosen the topsoil. Chan-Woo stepped onto the plot and began digging. His back ached after 10 minutes. After 20, his hands were shaking. An hour later, he sat down on the ground, breathing heavily. The body of an engineer, not the body of a farmer. Toru approached. He looked at the dug-up strip, 2 steps long, 1 step wide. A pitiful sight. Toru took the hoe and began digging. In an hour, he had dug up as much as Chan-Woo did in half a day. His movements were precise and powerful. He was used to working with his body. Then Yuk came, and 2 more. By evening, the 10 by 10 step plot had been loosened. Chan-Woo stood at the edge and looked at the black earth. A small patch. Tiny by the standards of any farmer from his world. But it was the first field in the history of this world. The first place where people wouldn't wait for the earth to yield on its own. They would plant seeds in it, and the earth would respond. He explained it to Toru. We put seeds in the ground, the earth grows them, then we harvest. Food. Lots of food. From a tiny seed grows a stalk, and on it many grains. Toru listened. Then he looked at the handful of seeds in Chan-Woo's palm and asked. It will definitely grow, Chan-Woo said. Definitely. He didn't say that it might not grow, that the soil might turn out to be too acidic or too alkaline, that wild barley is capricious, that birds might peck at the seeds, that a late frost might kill the sprouts. He didn't say that because Toru didn't need the truth about the risks. Toru needed confidence. People follow those who are confident. Chan-Woo sowed the seeds the next morning, with his hands. No seeder, no furrows. He simply scattered them over the loose earth and covered them with a thin layer of soil. Then he tamped them down with his feet. Then he watered them from a pot. Then he stood and looked at the brown rectangle of earth and felt his heart beating faster than it should. This isn't just a field, it's a beginning. A week later, the first shoots appeared. Thin green needles pierced the earth and stretched toward the light. Chang-woo crouched down and watched them. Tears welled up in his eyes. He blinked and they were gone. No time for emotions, there's work to be done. He built a fence of poles around the field to keep out deer and hares. He set up a scarecrow made of sticks and an old hide to keep out the birds. He showed Toru how to water it, not to flood it. The soil should be moist, but not wet. Toru watered it every morning, seriously, in silence, as if performing a ritual. While the barley grew, Chang-woo took on a second task, the neighbors. Winter ended, and the Black Otter clan wasn't the only one to emerge from it, but they were the only ones to emerge unscathed. Rumors spread quickly. In a world without phones or roads, news was passed along by hunters who crossed paths on the trails, through the women who were exchanged between clans, through the fugitives and outcasts who roamed the valley between camps. The Black Otter clan had survived the winter. Everyone. Not a single dead child, not a single old person on the hill. They have pots that don't crack. They have huts that are warm and smoke-free. They have a stranger who heals. The first to arrive were scouts from the Greystone clan, 2 young hunters, thin, alert, weapons at the ready. They entered the camp at dawn and stopped in the middle of the clearing. They looked around, at the pots drying by the stove, at the chimneys sticking out of the huts, at the field beyond the fence of poles, at the children who looked well-fed. Chief Han Taegu received them by the fire. He fed them. Hot broth made from fish and roots in a large charred pot. The scouts ate in silence. Then one of them asked about the stranger. Han Taegu pointed to Chang-woo. He was sitting by his kiln, firing a new batch of pots. The scout approached. He looked at the kiln, at the pots, at Chang-woo. Then he said something quickly. Chang-woo already understood the language well enough. Our chief wants to speak. Chang-woo looked at Han Taegu. The chief nodded. 3 days later, a delegation of 6 set out for the Greystone clan's encampment. Han Taegu, Toru, 2 hunters, from Mira, and Chang-woo. It took half a day to walk through the forest. Chang-woo walked and looked around. He memorized everything: the soil, the vegetation, the terrain, streams, outcrops of rock. His engineer's mind worked non-stop. This land was rich. The forest provided wood, the streams provided water. Clay was everywhere. Rock, too. He noticed a greenish streak on a cliff by the river. He stopped. He walked closer. He touched it. Soft stone with a green tint. Malachite. Copper carbonate. Copper ore. Chan-yu stood and looked at this green vein, and his hands trembled. Not from the cold, from realization. Copper. If there is copper here, then there is bronze. If there is bronze, then there are knives that cut, axes that chop, spears that pierce, tools that allow for building. Everything is changing. Everything. He chipped off a few pieces of malachite and stuffed them into his bag. Then he caught up with the others. The Greystone clan's encampment was smaller and poorer. 8 huts, about 30 people, half of them children. Many looked sick. Coughs, swollen joints, glazed eyes. Winter had hit them hard. The Greystone chief was young, no older than 25. He had become chief because the old chief and 3 of the senior hunters had died last fall. A raid. Chan-yu didn't know whose, but he saw the scars and knew it had been brutal. A girl stood next to the young chief, tall, with short hair, scars on her arms and cheekbone. She looked at the strangers the way a wolf looks. Not afraid, not hiding, assessing. Kang Ara. Chang-woo learned about her later, the daughter of the slain chief, the sole survivor of the family. She stood behind the new chief, but Chang-woo could see who was really making the decisions here. The young chieftain glanced at her before every word. The negotiations were simple. Han Taegu proposed an exchange: pots and a healer's help for meat and hides. The Greystone clan were the best hunters in the valley, even after their losses. They lacked what Changwu could provide, and the Blackrock clan lacked hunters. The young chieftain listened, nodded, glanced at Kang Ara. She didn't nod. She looked at Changwu, straight on, without blinking. Then she spoke a single sentence. "Show me." Changwu understood. Not words, a gesture. "Prove that you're worth our skins." He looked around. Among the sick was a woman holding a child, a boy of about 3, motionless, with a fever. Changwu approached. He asked for permission with a gesture. The woman looked at Kang Ara. She nodded. Changwu examined the boy. Hot, dry, dehydration. A familiar picture. He asked for hot water, salt, ash. So Mira was already standing nearby. She knew what to do. She prepared the solution herself. She began to give the child the solution herself. Changwu stepped back and let her work. Kang Ara watched. An hour later, the child began to cry. That was a good sign. Crying meant he had the strength to cry. So Mira continued to give him the solution, patiently, spoonful by spoonful. By evening, the boy opened his eyes and reached out for his mother. Kang Ara approached Changwu. She stood before him. She was half a head taller. She looked down at him. Then she reached out and squeezed his shoulder, tightly, almost painfully, and she said, "Good." The agreement was sealed. The Grey Com clan would supply meat and hides. The Black Otter clan would provide pots and medical care. Changwu was returning to camp, carrying pieces of malachite in a sack, copper ore. The first alliance. And Kang Ara's face before his eyes, a woman with scars and the eyes of a wolf. He knew he would see her again, and that she would become part of what he was building. But he didn't yet know how important a part. Copper didn't come easily. Changwu knew the theory. Malachite melts at a relatively low temperature, around 1,100 degrees. His pottery kiln could barely reach 800. Not enough. He needed another kiln, a higher one, right away, with forced draft and bellows. Without bellows, he wouldn't reach the necessary temperature. He started with the bellows. He took 2 pieces of deer hide. He sewed them into a bag using tendons. He left an opening on one side and inserted a tube made of rolled-up birch bark coated with clay into it. On the other side, 2 wooden slats served as handles. You press down to bring the slats together. Air comes out through the tube. You spread the slats apart. The bag fills with air through a valve made from a piece of hide. The simplest blacksmith's bellows. He spent 3 days on them. The first version didn't work. The hide let air through the seams. The second version worked poorly. The valve would get stuck. The third version worked. The stream of air from the tube was thin but strong. Changwu directed it into a regular furnace and tossed in some coal. The flame shot upward and roared. The temperature rose, much higher. The furnace walls turned white hot where the jet hit them. Good. But an ordinary furnace won't hold up. The walls are too thin. Unreinforced clay will crack at such temperatures. A new furnace is needed. A smelting furnace. He built it over 5 days. Not very tall, but thick-walled. The walls were 2 palms thick. The clay was mixed with small stones and chopped straw. The inner layer was coated with a mixture of clay and sand in equal proportions. This layer had to withstand direct heat. The opening for the bellows was at the bottom. The loading opening was at the top, a small chamber about the size of 2 fists. That was all that was needed. There wasn't much ore. The first smelting would be an experiment. Toru helped in silence. He watched as Changwu built and rebuilt, as he tore down a failed version and started over, as he cursed in an incomprehensible language when the clay cracked. Toru didn't understand why. Changwu showed him a green stone. Then he pointed at the fire. Then he made a gesture Toru had never seen before. He used his hands to depict how something solid becomes liquid and flows. The stone would become water. Toru looked at him, then at the stone, then back at Changwu, and in his eyes appeared the expression Changwu had already seen in half the clan. Poor stranger. He must have fallen out of a tree as a child. But Toru helped, because everything else the stranger had promised had come true. The day of the smelting arrived at the end of spring. Chang Wu loaded the crushed malachite into the furnace. Tiny pieces the size of a fingernail. He covered them with coal. He lit the fire and began pumping the bellows. Toru took turns pumping with him. An hour, 2, 3. His hands were burning, his shoulders were cramping. The heat from the furnace was so intense that his face was scorched and his skin began to peel. Chang Wu switched places with Toru every 20 minutes. Pump, pump. Don't stop. The temperature must rise and stay high. Spectators began to gather around the camp. First the children, then the women, then the men. Even the shaman, Park Dohwan, came out of his tent and watched from a distance. So Mira stood nearby and handed him water. Chang Wu drank without taking his eyes off the bellows. After 4 hours, he stopped. He let the furnace cool down, slowly. An hour, 2. Then he carefully dismantled the top part. He peered inside. At the bottom of the chamber, among the caked slag, lay a small puddle. Reddish, dull, uneven, about the size of half a palm. Copper. Chang Wu took it out. It was still warm, heavy for its size. He placed it on a stone and struck it with another stone. The copper yielded. It didn't split like a stone. It didn't crumble. It yielded. It deformed. It could be forged. He struck it again and again. He flattened the lump into a plate. Then he folded the plate in half. He struck it again. He flattened it again. This wasn't forging in the usual sense. It was beating a piece of metal with a stone. But the copper obeyed. It was soft, malleable. You could make anything out of it. A knife, an awl, a needle, a tip. Chan Yu held a small piece of red metal in his hands and felt its weight. Not its physical weight, historical. This piece of copper would change everything. Toru stood nearby and watched. His mouth was open. He saw how the green stone had become something else, something impossible. The stone was no longer a stone. He reached out and touched the plate. He ran his finger over the surface, smooth, already cold, heavy. He looked at Chang Wu and said a word that Chang Wu heard for the first time. Later, he learned what that word meant. New fire. Chief Han Taegu came in the evening. He picked up the copper plate. He turned it over. He bent it. It didn't break. He tried to cut a leather belt with it. It didn't work. Too blunt. The plate isn't a knife, not yet a knife, but Han Taegu understood the main thing. This material can be sharpened. It can be shaped. It can do things that stone cannot. He put the plate back and looked at Chang Wu with a long gaze. Then he said, "How much?" Chang Wu understood the question. How much of this material could be made? He answered, "A lot, if there's green stone." There was plenty of green stone. On the cliff by the river, there was enough for hundreds of smelting runs. For the next 2 weeks, Chang Wu smelted copper every 3rd day. Between smelting runs, he built tools. A stone hammer with a long handle, a stone anvil, a flat stone for rolling, molds for casting made of fired clay. The first casting came out crooked. The copper solidified unevenly, and the knife looked more like a curved claw. Chang Wu remelted it. The second one was better. The third one was passable. A knife, small, with a blade the length of a palm, still blunt. Chang Wu sharpened it on a wet stone, slowly, edge by edge. When he was done, the blade gleamed and cut through leather with the first stroke. He gave the knife to Toru. Toru cut a strip of rawhide with it, in one motion. His old stone knife had taken a minute to saw through such leather. This one went through it like butter. Toru held the knife up to the light and looked at the gleaming blade. Then he looked at Chang Wu, and for the first time ever, he hugged him. Briefly, tightly, almost painfully. There were no words. None were needed. Kang Ara arrived 3 days later, alone, without guards. She simply appeared at the edge of the camp as if she had stepped out of the forest. She approached the forge where Chang Wu was forging a second knife. She stood beside him. She watched. Chang Wu felt her gaze, heavy, appraising. She wasn't looking at the fire, not at the copper, at his hands, at how he held the hammer, at how he struck. Then she said, "I need a spear, not a knife, a spear." Chang Wu looked at her. A spear is a spearhead. A spearhead is bigger than a knife, more copper, more work. But the look on her face brooked no refusal. It wasn't a request, it was a condition. She wouldn't say why, but he guessed. A spear in exchange for her people, for the hunters of Greystone who would follow him, not because the chief ordered it, but because Kang Ara said so. He nodded. He spent 2 days making the spearhead. He melted the copper twice, poured it into a clay mold, forged it on a stone, sharpened it. The result was far from perfect. The edge was uneven, the balance was imperfect, the forging was rough. But it was a copper spearhead, the first in this world, heavier than stone, stronger, and it could be reforged if it became dull. Stone cannot be reforged. Stone can only be thrown away and a new one made. Copper is eternal. Chang Wu fitted the tip onto an ashwood shaft that Kang Ara had brought herself. Long, straight, polished to a smooth finish. She held the shaft as if it were an extension of her arm. Chang Wu secured the tip with sinew and poured molten pine resin into the joint. When the resin hardened, the tip sat firmly in place. It wouldn't budge. He handed the spear to Kang Ara. She took it in one hand, weighed it, tossed it, caught it, took 3 steps back, and hurled it at a tree at the edge of the clearing. The spear sank into the trunk to the depth of a palm. With a stone tip, it would have gone in only 2 fingers width. Kang Ara walked up to the tree, pulled out the spear. The tip was intact, not a crack, not a chip. She turned to Chang Wu, and for the first time ever, he saw on her face neither judgment nor calculation. He saw something resembling gratitude, but harsher, deeper, like the acknowledgement of an equal. She silently laid a bundle of hides and a deer carcass at his feet. Then she walked back into the forest, as quietly as she had come. Toru stood nearby and shook his head. He said quietly, "Be careful with her. She strikes before she thinks." Chang Wu nodded, but he was thinking of something else. She doesn't strike before she thinks. She strikes faster than others have time to think. Those are different things. Summer was in full swing. The barley in the field had grown knee-high and was beginning to head. Chang Wu went to the field every morning. He checked the soil, he checked the stalks, he looked for pests, he pulled out the weeds. The field was small, but it was living proof. The earth obeys if you know how to speak to it. The women of the clan came to look at the barley. They stood by the fence and touched the ears of grain, gently, as if touching a first pot. Something new, something important, something they didn't yet fully understand, but could sense. Alongside the field, Chang Wu was thinking of something else. A kid. He had seen wild goats on the hillsides north of the camp. Small, quick, cautious. The hunters didn't touch them. Too little meat, not worth the arrows. But Chang Wu looked at them and saw not meat. He saw milk, wool, manure for the fields, an offspring that in 3 generations would become tame. He explained to Toru, "We need a small one, a kid, alive. Don't kill it." Toru listened, and his face expressed the same gentle certainty that the stranger had gone mad again. But he went, and 2 days later he returned with a kid, small, gray, screaming in fear. Toru held it under his arm and looked as if he regretted all the decisions that had led him to this moment. Chang Wu made a pen, 4 poles driven into the ground, a rope made of twisted sinew. He threw some grass inside. He set down a bowl of water. The kid huddled in a corner and trembled. On the 3rd day, it ate out of So-mi's hands. On the 5th, it followed her around the camp like a dog. On the 10th, the children named it. The name was untranslatable, but meant something like, "the one who cries out in the morning." Shaman Pak No-hei watched all this, and his patience was running out. Chang Wu sensed it the way one senses a storm approaching. The air grew heavier. The people around the shaman grew quieter. Conversations trailed off when Chang Wu approached. Some stopped coming to the stove. Some stopped talking to So-mira. Small signs, cracks in the wall. The blow came at night. Chang Wu woke up to the noise, screams, pounding, the light of torches beyond the wall of the hut. He rushed outside. Park Dohwan was standing by the hearth. A dozen people surrounded him, men and women. They were painted with red and white clay, ritual paint. Changwu had seen it once when the clan was sending off a dead, paint to speak with the spirits. The shaman was speaking, loudly. His voice carried throughout the camp. Changwu understood almost everything. The spirits are angry. A stranger has desecrated the fire. A stranger has carved the green stone of the ancestors into a new shape, and the stone screams in pain. The spirits have sent a sign. The deer are gone. The fish are gone. Soon the sun will go. If the stranger does not leave first, the clan will perish. The people listened. Some nodded. Fear worked better than any argument.
Changwu stood at the entrance to the tent and said nothing. Chief Han Tae-gu stepped out of his tent. He stood between Changwu and the shaman. He looked at both of them. His face was heavy. He was caught between a rock and a hard place. The shaman spoke on behalf of the spirits. The stranger spoke on behalf of life. And neither could be rejected without splitting the clan in two. Changwu stepped forward. He didn't know what to say. He still lacked the words for long speeches, but he knew that silence meant defeat. He pointed to the stove. He pointed at the huts from which warm smoke rose. Winter, warmth, everyone alive. Then he pointed at the pots. Food, water, clean. The children are healthy. Then he pointed to the field beyond the fence. Soon, food from the earth. Then he pointed to the small copper knife on Toru's belt. A knife, better than a stone. Then he looked at the shaman and said slowly, "The spirits have given me knowledge. I am sharing. If the spirits are angry about this, it means the spirits do not want the children to live." He did not believe in spirits, but he spoke in a language these people understood, and he hit the mark. A woman in the crowd pressed a child close to her, the mother of the girl he had saved first. She looked at the shaman, and there was a question in her gaze. "If the stranger leaves, who will save my child next time?" The shaman saw that look, and he realized he was losing. Not now, not tonight, because people choose living children, not dead spirits. He fell silent mid-sentence. Then he turned and went into his hut. The people dispersed, slowly, quietly. Night returned. Changwu stood by the dying fire and felt his heart pounding wildly. This was not a victory, it was a reprieve. The shaman had not given up. He had retreated to strike again. Toru approached and stood beside him. He was silent. Then he said quietly, "He won't stop." Changwu nodded. "I know." Somi came later. When everyone had left, she sat down next to Changwu by the stove. Her hands were trembling. Not from the cold, from fear. She had betrayed the teacher. Not with words, with her presence. By standing on Changwu's side rather than the shaman's. Park Dohwan had seen it, and he would not forgive her. Changwu looked at her. She was pale. Her eyes were red. Her lips were pressed together. He wanted to say something comforting. He couldn't find the words. Instead, he took a small object out of his bag. He had made it the day before yesterday and had been waiting for the right moment. A pair of copper tweezers, 2 thin rods soldered together at one end, springy, precise, for removing splinters, for treating wounds, for anything that requires precision that fingers cannot provide. He held out the tweezers to Somira. She took them, turned them over in her hands, clenched them, unclenched them. The tweezers sprang back. The tips came together perfectly. She picked up a thin splinter from the ground and gripped it with the tweezers. The splinter didn't slip out. Somira looked at Changwu, then at the tweezers, then back at Changwu. And the tears in her eyes dried up, replaced by something else. Calm. Not the calm of someone who had given up, the calm of a person who had made a decision. She said quietly, "I will study, no matter what happens." A week after the nighttime encounter with the shaman, the barley had ripened. The ears had turned yellow and grown heavy. The grains had hardened. Changwu cut the first ear with a stone sickle he had made especially for the task. He rubbed the grains between his palms. He blew away the chaff. He placed a handful of clean grains on a stone. Toru stood nearby. Changwu showed him the grains. Then he pointed to the field. From here, these, lots of them. Toru picked up a grain. He rolled it between his fingers. He bit into it. Hard, raw, tasteless. Chang-Woo took the grain back. He ground a handful between two stones. He mixed it with water. He made a flatbread. He placed it on the wall of the hot oven. 10 minutes later, the flatbread was golden brown. Chang-Woo took it out. He broke it open. Steam rose from the center. The smell was warm and rich. No one in this camp had ever smelled anything like it. He gave half to Toru. Toru took a bite. He chewed slowly. His face changed. Surprise, then something like bewilderment, then that deep, silent understanding that replaced long speeches for Toru. Food, from the earth. No need to chase deer. No need to set traps. The earth gives it herself, if you know how to ask. Toru finished the flatbread. He looked at the field. He looked at Chang-Woo and said, "More." Chang-Woo nodded. "More, much more. But for that, we need more land, more hands, more seeds, and more people who are willing to dig, not just hunt." The harvest was gathered in 3 days, by the whole camp, men, women, children. Everyone cut the ears of grain and piled them into large pots. Chang-Woo showed them how to thresh. Spread out a hide, place the ears of grain on it, beat them with a stick. The grains fall out, gather them up, sift them in the wind. The chaff blows away, the grain remains. They didn't get much, about 20 handfuls of clean grain. That would be enough for a week's worth of flatbreads for the clan, no more. But they had seeds. In the fall, he would sow twice as much. Next spring, 4 times as much. In 2 years, the field would feed everyone. That was the plan. A long one, a patient one, like building a bridge, one support after another. By the fall of the 2nd year, Chang-Woo had stopped counting the days. Not because he'd lost track, because the days had become so full to bursting that there was no time to count them. Every morning began with a round. The ovens, the field, the well, the supplies, the sick, if there were any. Then work, smelting copper, forging, training. Then an evening by the fire with So-Mira, reviewing what she had learned that day. Then sleep, short, heavy, and morning again. The alliance with the Greystone clan was working. Kan-Ara came once a week. She brought meat. She took away the pots and knives, silently, businesslike, without unnecessary words. But every time she lingered a little longer than necessary. She stood by the stove. She watched Chang-Woo work. Once she asked, "What else can you do?" Chang-Woo answered without hesitation, "Everything that's needed." She looked at him for a long time, then she left. But the following week, she brought 2 wounded people with her, a man with a broken arm, a woman with a burn on her leg. Without a word, no explanations, she just brought them and placed them in front of him. Treat them. Chang-Woo treated them. So-Mi helped. He set the fracture with a copper clamp he had forged specifically for that purpose. A small one, 2 plates with holes, a leather strap between them. The clamp held the bone in the correct position better than any wooden splint. When he finished, Kan-Ara stood nearby and looked at the clamp. Chang-Woo handed it to her. "This is for you, for your people, So-Mi will show you how to use it." Kan-Ara took the clamp. She turned it over in her hands. She looked at Chang-Woo, then at her own hands. Big, rough, scarred. Hands that know only how to break things. And suddenly, the small clamp looked out of place in those hands, like a baby bird in a bear's paw. Chang-Woo understood what she was thinking. He said, "Your hands aren't just for hitting. They can build. They can fix things. This clamp was made for your hands." Kan-Ara was silent. Then she turned away abruptly. But Chang-Woo caught a glimpse. Her chin was trembling. A day later, So-Mi told him, Kan-Ara hadn't slept that night. She sat alone, holding the clamp in her hands. So-Mira knew this because she had gone to check on the wounded and had seen her by the fire. Kan-Ara wasn't crying, but something inside her had snapped. Or perhaps the opposite. Something had healed. The 3rd clan joined the alliance at the beginning of autumn, the Fast River clan. River people, fishermen and gatherers. They lived downstream and were the first to suffer from the polluted water. When their chief heard about the wells and pots and copper knives, he came himself. A small, wiry man with shrewd eyes.
He walked around the Black Otter camp for 2 days. He handled the pots. He felt the copper knives. He peered into the oven. He sniffed the barley flatbreads. On the 3rd day, he sat down across from Khan Tegu and Chang Yu and said, "We're with you." The terms were simple. Fish in exchange for pots. People in exchange for knowledge. Their hunters would learn from Toru. Their women would learn from Somir. Their children would learn from Chang Wu. Chang Wu nodded and thought. 3 clans. About 130 people. This was no longer just a campsite. It was the beginning of something bigger. He needed a place. One place where everyone could gather. Where they could build permanent homes instead of temporary shelters. Where they could cultivate large fields. Where they could set up a smithy that would operate every day. He began to search. He walked through the valley, alone. Sometimes with Toru. Sometimes with Kang Ara, who knew the area better than anyone. He was looking for the confluence of 2 rivers. Rivers mean water. Water means fields. Water means protection. A city at the confluence of rivers can be defended from 2 sides by water. A wall would only need to be built on the 3rd side, and he found it. 2 rivers converged at the foot of a low hill, a wide floodplain with fertile, dark soil, a forest nearby for building materials, clay along the banks, stone on the hill, an open area for fields to the south, wind from the west, good for a mill when the time comes. Chang Wu stood at the top of the hill and looked at the place where the rivers met, and he saw a city. Not now, not in a month, in a year, in 2. A city with an earthen rampart, with a road, with a market, with a smithy, with a school, with a hospital. He crouched down and drew with a stick on the ground, a rectangle for the wall, a circle for the square in the center, lines for the streets, a square for the school, a rectangle for the blacksmith shop, a semicircle for the market. Toru stood nearby and looked at the lines in the ground. He said quietly, "You see what isn't there?" Chang Wu replied, "Not yet." Then he drove the stick into the ground where he had drawn the school, the first stake, the first point of the future city. He named it Hansol. Sol meant pine tree in the language of his world. Han in honor of the chieftain. Han's Pine City. The chieftain liked it. Preparations for the move took a month. Chang Wu organized it as a logistical operation. 3 groups. The first builds, the second carried supplies, the third provided security. They began building with an earthen rampart. Not walls, a rampart. A mound of earth as high as an adult man's chest. On top of the rampart, poles sharpened at the top. A palisade. Primitive, but enough to keep a deer from wandering into the garden and make a stranger's scout think twice. Inside the rampart, first came the houses. Not huts, houses. A frame of poles. Walls of woven branches smeared with clay. A roof of layers of birch bark and straw. The floor was raised above the ground on logs. There was a stove with a chimney inside. It wasn't quick. One house took 10 people 5 days to build. But every house was warmer and sturdier than any hut. And every house stood in its own place. Not temporarily, permanently. People looked at these houses, and something changed in their faces. A hut is a place to spend the night. A house is a life. A hut says you're just passing through. A house says you're staying. The 4th clan joined when they saw the construction. The Low Water clan, the marsh people, the poorest in the valley. Mensori came with them. Chan Wu saw her for the first time when she was standing at the Hansol gate next to her father. Not very tall, plump, rosy-cheeked, with a broad smile that appeared even when there was nothing to smile about. She came, and the first thing she looked at wasn't the houses or the smithy. She looked at the ground. She crouched down, took a handful of soil, rubbed it between her fingers, sniffed it. Then she stood up and looked at Chang Wu and said, "Good soil. But the field is too close to the river. It will flood in the spring." Chang Wu blinked, looked at the field. He looked at the river. He looked at Meng Sori. She was right. He hadn't accounted for the spring flood. The fields needed to be raised higher, or drained, or both. Meng Sori knew the land. Not the way he knew it from textbooks. She knew it with her hands. Through 30 generations of people who had lived on the marsh and wrung every grain from the mud.
Chang Wu crouched down next to her and began sketching drainage ditches with a stick. She watched, nodded, corrected him. Here the slope needs to be steeper. Here it's clay, not sand, so the water won't drain down. Here the ditch needs to be deeper. They sat there for 3 hours. Her father stood nearby and watched silently as his daughter spoke to a stranger as an equal. Then he turned to Han Tae-gu and said, "My daughter will stay here, not as a servant." Han Tae-gu looked at Chang Wu. Chang Wu nodded, not as a servant, as an advisor. Meng Sori blushed to her ears, but she didn't lower her gaze. Hansol was growing. By the winter of the second year, there were 20 houses inside the rampart. The smithy was in operation every day. 3 fields had been sown with barley for the winter. There were 4 wells, 2 cesspools. The road from the gate to the smithy was trampled as hard as stone. About 170 people lived inside or nearby. 4 clans, 4 chiefs, 1 council, and 1 man to whom all 4 chiefs came when they needed to decide what to do next. Chang Wu didn't want this role. He wanted to build furnaces and forge copper and teach Somira. But the role found him, because every argument between the chiefs ended the same way. They turned to him. "What do you say?" And he spoke. Not because he knew the answer to every question, because he knew how to ask the right question in return. When the leader of Greystone argued with the leader of Swift River over fishing grounds, Chang Wu asked, "How much fish does your clan need for the winter?" The chief named a number. Chang Wu asked the second one, "How much do you need?" He named his. Chang Wu added them up. Then he asked, "How much fish is in the river?" Both fell silent. They hadn't counted, ever. Chang Wu said, "Let's count, then we'll decide." They counted. There was enough fish for both. The dispute ended. That was his method. Not orders, not force, numbers, facts, calculation. In a world where decisions were made by a fist or a shaman's mutterings, simple addition of 2 and 2 looked like magic. But it worked better. The school opened at the beginning of winter. 1 room, walls of clay-coated branches, a low roof, benches made of split logs, a board of fired clay nailed to the wall, a piece of chalk that Chang Wu found on a chalk cliff across the river. 20 students, children aged 6 to 12, and 8 adults. Women, all 8 of them. The men didn't come. Learning to write with a stick on clay isn't a man's job. Chang Wu didn't insist. They'll come in time, when they see that literate women calculate faster. He started with numbers, not letters. Numbers are simpler. Numbers are more useful. 1 stick is 1. 2 sticks are 2. A circle with a stick is 10. 2 circles are 100. The decimal system, the same one he knew, the same one his whole world uses. Because it's logical. Because there are 10 fingers on each hand. The children learned quickly. Within a week, they could count to 100. Within 2 weeks, they were adding and subtracting. Within a month, the best among them were multiplying simple numbers. The adult women learned more slowly, but with greater determination. Meng Sori remembered everything the first time. She counted the sacks of grain and the pots of oil and the fish in the storerooms, and after a month, she knew exactly, down to the last handful, how much food was in Hansol and how many days it would last. Chang Wu looked at her and thought, "This is who will manage the economy of this city. Not him, her." Because it was in her blood. 3 generations of people who had wrung life from the swamp had taught her to count every grain. He devised the letters based on Hangul, 24 characters. Each character represents 1 sound. No hieroglyphs, no syllabic systems. 1 sound, 1 letter. So that anyone could learn to read in a week if they wanted to. Hangul was created for this purpose. King Sejong invented it in the 15th century specifically so that ordinary people could read. Chang Wu did the same thing, only 5,000 years earlier, and on another planet. But the principle is the same. Writing should be as simple as a wheel. The first to learn all the letters was Han Yuna, the chief's daughter. She was already 8, skinny, with a straight back, with serious eyes that looked at the world as if she already understood everything, but was waiting for confirmation. She arrived at school before everyone else,
She left after everyone else. She wrote with a stick on wet clay until the letters became even. Chang-woo looked at her and remembered the night he dripped water from a horn onto her. 6 years ago. No, 2 years ago. Time is measured differently here. She approached him after class and said in a steady, serious voice, "I want to teach others, to show them letters, just like you do." Chang-woo looked at her, 8 years old. In his world, 8-year-olds play games. Here, 8-year-olds have already seen death and know the value of water. He nodded. "All right, you will teach." The next day, Han Yuna stood before the younger children and began showing them the letters. Slowly, patiently, repeating each character 5 times, just as Chang-woo had done. She copied his method, his gestures, his patience. Chang-woo stood in the doorway and watched, and he thought, here it is, the institute. Not a building, not a law. A person who teaches another who will teach the next. A chain that won't break when he dies, because he will die. Sooner or later, everyone here dies young, and the only thing that will remain after him is not copper knives or clay ovens. It is the knowledge in Han Yun's head, and in those she will teach, and in those they will teach. It is more important than any iron. Meanwhile, the shadows in the east were thickening. Toru returned from a long patrol and brought news. People had been spotted on the eastern ridge, tall, with painted faces, with bones in their hair. Bone faces. Scouts. 3 of them. They stood on the crest and looked down at the valley. Then they went back east. Toru spoke calmly, but his hand rested on the hilt of his copper knife. The faces. Chang-woo had heard about them since the first week, a tribe of cannibals from the eastern steppes. They moved in waves. They didn't seize territory. They destroyed it. They killed the men. They took the women. They ate the children. Not a metaphor, literally. Their leader, Che Gyum-chol, was described as a 2-meter-tall giant with a sun tattoo on his face. He believed that by eating his enemies, he took their strength, and his warriors believed it too. 3 scouts on the ridge meant the main horde was close. Maybe a year, maybe 2, but they would come, and when they came, copper knives and clay walls alone wouldn't be enough. Chang-woo sat in the smithy and stared at the fire. He was thinking, copper is soft. A copper knife is good against wood and hide. It can hold its own against a stone axe. But that's not enough. We need bronze, copper, and tin. He hadn't seen any tin, but he had seen something else. Arsenic. Arsenopyrite, on the same cliff where he found the malachite. Arsenic bronze, the oldest alloy. Before people discovered tin, they mixed copper with arsenic and obtained a metal harder than pure copper. Toxic. Arsenic fumes during smelting are poisonous. He knew that, but there was no choice. He began to experiment. He added arsenic ore to the copper during smelting, different proportions, 1 handful to 10, 2 to 10, 3. He worked outdoors. He stood on the windward side. He covered his face with a wet rag. Still, by evening, after smelting, he had a headache and felt nauseous. The 3rd smelting yielded results. The alloy was darker than pure copper, heavier, and when Chang-woo tried to bend the sheet, it sprang back. It didn't bend softly like copper. It resisted. He sharpened the edge on a wet stone. The blade turned out sharper than copper, and harder. He ran it along an oak stick. The shavings curled, clean, even. Bronze. Not perfect, arsenic-rich, dangerous to work with, but bronze. He gave the first bronze knife to Kang Ara. She came for it herself, as if she'd sensed it. She took the knife, checked the balance, slashed at a fence post with it. The post split in half. With a copper knife, she would have left only a dent. Kang Ara looked at the knife, then at Chang-woo, and in her eyes he saw what he'd seen in good commanders in war movies. Calculation. Cold, precise calculation. She understood what this metal meant for war, and for her personally. She said, "How many can you make?" Chang Wu replied, "Not many. There's not enough ore. Arsenic is dangerous. Every smelting run is toxic." She nodded. Then she said, "Then make only the tips, for spears. A spear with a bronze tip versus one with a stone tip. The answer is obvious." Chang Wu nodded. She's right. Copper knives, bronze tips, allocating resources by priority. She thought like a commander, without a single day of training, on pure instinct. Winter had come, Han Sol's second winter, but this winter was different. The houses stood firm, the stoves were warm. Supplies of barley, dried meat, and dried fish lay in pots with tight-fitting lids. The wells provided clean water. So Mi was seeing patients in the special house that Chang Wu had built as an infirmary. Meng So-ri counted the supplies and distributed the food. Kang Ara commanded the hunters and the sentries on the rampart. Han Yun taught the children the alphabet. Chang Wu stood on the rampart and looked out over the town. Smoke rose from 20 chimneys. Children ran along the well-trodden road. A woman carried a pot of water from the well. A man dragged firewood toward the smithy. Ordinary life. An ordinary day. Nothing special. But 2 years ago, this was just an empty hill. 2 years ago, he lay naked and wet by the stream, and someone was poking him with the blunt end of a spear. He closed his eyes, opened them. The city was still there. It hadn't vanished. It wasn't a dream. It was real. A figure appeared down by the gate, small, quick. Red hair stuck out from under her cloak like tongues of flame. The woman walked lightly and confidently, like someone who knows exactly where she's going. She entered the gate and looked around. Then she raised her head and saw Chang Wu on the rampart. She smiled, broadly, cheerfully, as if to an old friend. Chang Wu didn't know her. He had never seen this woman before. But she looked at him as if she had known him all her life. She climbed up onto the rampart, stood beside him, short, thin, red-haired, eyes quick and watchful, eyes that see everything and forget nothing. She spoke in the language of the valley. "My name is Yun Bi. I trade in news, and I have news for you." Chang Wu looked at her. Then he asked, "What is it?" She leaned closer, lowered her voice. "The shamans of the 12 clans have formed a council, a secret one. They call it the Council of Smoke, and they have decided that you must die." She straightened. She smiled again, brightly and serenely, as if she had just said that the weather would be nice tomorrow. Chang Wu looked at her and felt a chill run down his spine, not from the winter wind, from the realization. The game had gotten bigger, much bigger. Yun Bi stayed in Hansol, not because she was invited, because she decided to stay. Chang Wu quickly realized it was useless to argue with her. She didn't ask for permission. She simply was where she saw fit. On the first day, she walked all over the city, every house, every workshop, every nook and cranny. She talked to people, to everyone, to the women at the well, with the men at the smithy, with the children at the school, with the sentries on the rampart. By evening, she knew Hansol better than Chang Wu. She knew who was friends with whom, who hated who stole grain from the communal granary, who sleeps with another man's wife, who fears the shaman, who is ready to die for Chang Wu, and who is ready to sell him for an extra piece of meat. She sat across from Chang Wu by the stove that evening and laid it all out in a steady, calm voice, without emotion, without judgment. Facts. Chang Wu listened and felt the ground slipping from under his feet. He was building a city. He thought about furnaces and fields and bronze and the school. But beneath the surface, a life he couldn't see was seething. Intrigues, fears, resentments, people, living people with their small and big secrets. He was an engineer. He knew how to build things, but he didn't know how to build relationships between people. Not like this, not on this scale. Yun Bi knew how. She'd been doing it her whole life. For 10 years, she'd moved between the clans, buying and selling news, building a network of debtors and allies. She knew the weaknesses of every chieftain and every shaman in the valley. Chang Wu asked her straight out, "Why are you here?" She smiled. "Because you're the most interesting news in the valley in the last 100 years, and because the Council of Smoke paid me to find out how to kill you." Chang Wu froze. Yunbi kept smiling. "Don't worry, I took the payment and decided not to carry out the order. It's bad for my reputation, but good for my future." "Because you have a future, and the Council of Smoke does not." Changwu looked at her, trying to understand. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. Every word she spoke was calculated, and that calculation worked in her favor. Always. But now her interests and his aligned, and she knew it. He asked, "What do you want?" She answered without a pause, "A seat in your city on your council, not a wife, not a concubine, a seat at the table where decisions are made." Changwu thought for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Yunbi held out her hand. He shook it. Her palm was small, dry, and firm. A handshake like a deal. The first in this world. From that day on, Yunbi became his eyes and ears. She knew what was happening in the valley before any scout. Her people were everywhere. Merchants, vagabonds, widows, fugitives, people whom no one noticed, who listened and remembered and passed on the information. The Council of Smoke. 12 shamans. They gathered in a secret place in the northern swamp once a month on the new moon. Park Dohwan was among them. Not the leader, but a voice that was listened to. He told the others about Changwu, about pots and copper and school and letters, about how a stranger was taking power away from the shamans, bit by bit. Not by force. Worse, by knowledge. The shamans understood the threat. If people learn to heal themselves, why do they need a shaman? If people learn to count, why do they need a bone diviner? If people learn to read, why do they need an interpreter of the spirit's will? Changwu wasn't building a city. He was building a world in which there was no place for shamans. And the shamans decided to stop him. The first assassin came a week later, at night. Yunbi warned them 2 days in advance. She knew who. She knew when. She knew where from. A young hunter from the Wolf Trail clan. His clan's shaman had promised him 3 wives and a place by the chieftain's fire if he brought back the head of the pale shaman. Yunbi didn't raise the alarm. She made it easier. She waited for him in his own bed. When he returned to the Wolf Trail clan's camp after a 3-day journey to Hansol, he found Yunbi sitting by his hearth. She was drinking his brew from his bowl and smiling. She told him one thing, that his shaman was sleeping with his mother. It was true. Yunbi knew this because she knew everything. The assassin didn't make it to Hansol. He returned to his shaman and broke his jaw. Yunbi told Changwu about it over breakfast, between 2 sips of broth, as if discussing the weather. Changwu looked at her and thought for the first time that this woman was more dangerous than any spear, and that he was incredibly glad she was on his side. The spring of the 3rd year brought changes. Envoys from 6 clans came to Hansol. 6 out of 12. Half the valley wanted to join. Not out of love for Changwu, out of fear of the Bonefaces. Scouts on the eastern ridge were appearing more and more often. In groups of 10 and 20, they descended to the foothills, burned isolated camps, killed whoever they found. One of the clans on the eastern edge of the valley vanished overnight. 40 people. Not a single survivor. At the site of the camp, they found gnawed bones and extinguished fires. Fear drove people to Hansol, to the walls, to the bronze spears, to the man who knows things no one else knows. Changwu took everyone in. The city grew. A second ring of houses sprang up beyond the earthen rampart, then a third. New fields, new workshops, new people. By the summer of the 3rd year, about 400 people lived in Hansol and the surrounding area. More than in any settlement in the valley throughout its entire history. That was a lot. Too much for one person. Changwu couldn't be everywhere. He couldn't decide everything on his own. He began to delegate. Not because he wanted to, because there was no other way. Kang Ara took charge of defense. Watches, patrols, training. She drove the hunters to exhaustion. She taught them to form a line instead of running in a crowd. She taught them to keep formation. She taught them to strike with a spear, not like a hunter, but like a soldier, with a short, precise movement, without a wind-up, without shouting, quietly and deadly. So Mi ran the infirmary. 3 students helped her. They already knew how to clean wounds, prepare rehydration solutions, and splint fractures. So Mi taught them just as Chang Wu had taught her, patiently, step by step, repeating until they remembered. Mensori managed the fields and supplies. She knew every sack, every pot, every handful. Under her care, the land yielded more than Chang Wu had expected. She felt the soil, knew when to water and when to leave it alone, knew which field was resting and which was ready for sowing. Han Yuna ran a school, 30 students, children and adults, letters and numbers. She was a strict teacher, stricter than Chang Wu. She didn't allow laziness. She didn't allow them to skip classes. A 10-year-old girl with a straight back stood before grown men and told them they had written a letter incorrectly. And they listened, because she was the chief's daughter, and because she was right. Yunbi did what she did best. She knew. Her network stretched across the entire valley. She knew what was happening in every clan. She knew the plans of the Council of Smoke. She knew the movements of the Bone Faces. She knew who would betray and who would remain loyal. And every evening she came to Chang Wu and told him, quietly, calmly, with that smile that meant the world was exactly as she thought it was, and there was nothing to be surprised about. Chang Wu looked at them, at all 5 of them, Kong Ara, Somira, Meng Sori, Han Yuna, Yun Bi. 5 women, 5 pillars upon which his city stood, his world, everything he had built. He hadn't built it for them, he built for everyone, but they were the ones who took it up and carried it forward. Without them, he would have been a naked, freezing stranger by the stream. With them, he was the foremost among the city's advisors, a city that existed against all odds. The summer of the 3rd year was hot and unsettling. Bone-faced scouts were appearing closer and closer to Consol. Once, Khan Ara sentries encountered a group of 5 warriors on a daytime patrol from the city. The fight was brief. 2 Bone-faces' faces were killed. 3 fled. One of the sentries was wounded, a bronze tip in his shoulder. No, stone. The Bone-faces had no bronze, but there were many of them, far more than Hansol's men. Yun Bi brought the numbers. Her men had counted the campfires on the eastern ridge, about 800 warriors, maybe more. With the women and children they were dragging along, the total horde could reach 2,000. Against Hansel's 400 men, of whom at most 150 were fit for battle. Chang Wu sat in the smithy, staring at the numbers that Mang So Ri had written on a clay tablet. 150 against 800. 1-5. With bronze weapons and discipline, their chances were better than they would be with stones and a mob. But it wasn't enough. He needed something else. He thought for 3 nights. On the 4th night, he woke up with the answer. Terrain. It's not numbers that decide the battle. Terrain and training. And logistics. He recalled lessons he had never specifically studied, but which he knew. Because every educated person of his era knew basic military history. Thermopylae. A narrow pass. 300 Spartans against an army. They lost, but they held the pass for 3 days. Because in a narrow place, numerical superiority doesn't work. Chan Wu spread out a map of the valley before Kong Ara. A map he had drawn himself on a large piece of tanned hide. Rivers, hills, forests, trails, a ridge to the east. He pointed to a spot, a ford, the only place where the horde could cross the river. The river was wide and deep, except for this ford, where the water came up to one's waist. Kang Era looked at the map. She looked at the ford, and she understood instantly. Here, we'll meet them here. The ford was 30 paces wide. The bank on their side was high, steep. From there, they could strike with spears and stones from above. The enemy would be wading through the water, wet, slipping on the rocks, out of formation, waist-deep in the river. And on the bank, people would be waiting for them behind a rampart of logs and earth, with bronze spears, well-fed, rested, in dry boots. Boots. Chang Wu took care of this separately. Footwear. Hunters used to wear leather wrappings. Their feet got wet and cold. They slipped on the rocks. Chang Wu showed them how to sew boots, a double-layered leather sole, an upper made of soft leather. Wraps made of strips of fabric that Mensori began weaving on the simplest loom made of poles. The foot stays dry, warm, doesn't slip on the rocks. He outfitted the entire army in 3 weeks. The women sewed day and men sori organized them into teams, 10 pairs a day, every day. At the same time, Chang Wu was preparing something Kang Ada hadn't asked for, but which could save more lives than any spear. A field hospital. 3 tents behind the defensive line, boiled water in barrels, clean rags, copper tweezers, splints, tendon sutures for closing wounds. So Mira and her 3 students would wait for the wounded, not on the battlefield, behind it, where it was safe, where they could work calmly and precisely. Chang Wu came up with one more thing. Signal flags, 3 colors. Red cloth dyed with berry juice, white, undyed, black, dyed with charcoal. Red means attack, white means hold your ground, black means retreat to camp. A simple system, 3 commands. That's enough for people who have never fought in formation. Kang Ada learned the flags in a minute, her squad leaders in a day, the rank-and-file soldiers in 3 days. Not everyone, but most. Autumn came early. A cold wind brought the first frosts at the end of summer, and along with the frosts came news. The Boneface horde had crossed the eastern ridge and was descending into the valley. Yun Bi confirmed it. About 1,000 men, along with the supply train. About 600 warriors, more than expected. Their leader, Cho Gyom Chol, was marching at the front, 6 feet tall, with a sun tattoo on his face, wearing a necklace of children's skulls around his neck. He declared that he would eat the pale shaman's heart and take his power. Chang Wu listened to this and said nothing. Then he went to the smithy and forged spearheads until morning. 20 of them before dawn. His hands trembled with fatigue. Arsenic fumes clouded his mind. But he forged on, because every spearhead meant 1 warrior with bronze against an enemy with stone. Hansul's army reached the ford 2 days before the horde's approach. 160 fighters, men and women. Khan Ara made no distinctions. If you can hold a spear, you stand in the ranks. She positioned them on the high bank. 3 lines, the first with spears behind a log rampart, the second with javelins behind the first, the third as a reserve. The 10 best archers on the flanks, bows with bone tips, arrows with bronze tips. Chang Wu was not in the ranks. He was in the supply train, behind the hospital tents, next to So Mira and her students, next to Meng Sori, who was counting the supplies of water and rags, next to Han Yun, who stood quietly, holding a birch bark scroll and a charcoal pencil. She would be taking notes. Chang Wu had asked her to. Write down everything you see. Then people will read it. Yun Bi had disappeared the day before the battle. Chang Wu didn't ask where. He knew she was doing what she thought was necessary, and that she would return. Or not return. But in any case, she would do something that would change the situation. The morning of the battle was cold and foggy. Chang Wu stood on a hill behind the supply train and looked at the river. The fog lay over the water like a white blanket. Sounds came from the fog, footsteps, voices, a dull, rhythmic thud. They were striking their spears against their shields. Then the fog began to lift, and Chang Wu saw them. The bone faces stood on the opposite bank. Many, so many. It seemed as if the entire shore was moving. Tall, painted, with bones and feathers in their hair, with stone axes and clubs. Cho Gyom Chol stood at the front. Even from this distance, Chang Wu could see the sun tattoo on his face and the necklace around his neck. Gyom Chol raised his hand. He shouted something. His voice was thunderous. The horde responded with a roar. The ground shook. Then they entered the water. Chang Wu raised the red flag. The first wave entered the water and immediately slowed down. The river was cold. The current was strong. The rocks on the bottom were slippery. The bone-faced warriors waded waist-deep in the water, their movements heavy and clumsy. On the bank, Kang Ara waited, silently, motionless, a spear in her hand, eyes narrowed. She waited until the front ranks reached the middle, until the second ranks followed them in, until the stream became dense and there was nowhere to retreat. Then she raised her hand and lowered it. The archers struck first, 10 arrows. The bronze tips pierced the leather cloaks like paper. The stone tips wouldn't have pierced even thick hide from that distance. Bronze did. 5 fell into the water. screams, blood on the river's surface, but the horde kept coming. The next ones followed the fallen, and the next. There were many of them, too many for 10 archers to stop the tide. The first bone faces reached the shore. They scrambled up the slippery slope, wet, frozen, breathing heavily, and they met a wall of spears. The first line of Khan Ara struck simultaneously, a short, precise thrust forward and downward, just as she had taught. No wind-up, no shout, bronze spearheads against bare flesh. The bone faces in the front fell back into the water. Those behind them pressed forward. The shore turned into a mess of bodies and mud and blood and water. Chan Wu stood on the hill and watched. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, from what he was seeing. He had never seen people killing people. Lab tests and field exercises don't prepare you for this, for the sound, for the smell, for the sight of a spear entering a stomach and a man folding in half and falling. He forced himself to watch, because if he looked away, he would miss the moment when he needed to change the flag. The battle lasted 4 hours, 4 hours that felt like 4 days. The bone faces attacked in waves, the first, the second, the third. Each time they were pushed back. Each time they left bodies in the water and on the shore. But each time they came closer. On the third wave, they broke through the left flank. A dozen warriors climbed over the log rampart and cut into the ranks. Hand-to-hand combat. Stone axes against bronze spears. Close. Dirty. Terrifying. Chan Wu raised a white flag. Halt. Reserves forward. The third line, under Toru's command, rushed toward the breach. Toru fought like a beast, a copper knife in one hand, a short spear in the other. The breach was closed. But 12 of Hansal's fighters lay on the ground. The living and the dead intermingled. So Mira and her student ran to the wounded. So Mira worked just as Chang Wu had taught her. Quickly, precisely, without panic. Examination, bleeding, tourniquet, cleaning, splint, next, next, next. Her hands were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her face was pale, but her hands did not tremble. The fourth wave was the most terrifying. Cui Guillaume Chol entered the water himself, leading the way. His warriors roared behind him. He walked through the river as if through a puddle. The water reached his waist, yet he walked as if on dry land. Huge, unstoppable, with a stone axe the size of a child's head. Kang Ara met him on the bank, in person. She didn't wait behind the rampart. She stepped forward. A spear with a bronze tip was aimed at his chest. Gyung Chol saw her and laughed. A woman, with a stick. He swung his axe. Kang Ara didn't block it. She stepped aside, quickly, like water flowing around a rock, and she struck him in the knee with her spear. The bronze tip sank between the bones. Gyung Chol collapsed. His knee cracked. He fell to one knee and howled, not from pain, from rage. He swung the axe again, while lying down. Kang Ara took a step back. Then she swung her spear and struck his broken leg with the shaft. He fell face first into the mud. His warriors saw it. Everyone saw it. Their chieftain, a 6-foot-tall cannibal with a sun tattoo, lying in the mud, knocked down by a woman with a bronze spear. Something had broken within the horde. Not their formation. They had no formation. Their faith had broken. Faith that their leader was invincible. Faith that they were stronger. The fifth wave did not begin. The bone faces stopped in the water. They looked at their leader. Then they began to back away, slowly, then faster. Then they ran, back across the river, to the other bank, and further, toward the ridge. Kan Ara stood over the defeated Gim Chol. Her spear was aimed at his throat. Around her stood Hansal's army, wet, covered in blood, exhausted to the point of losing their human form, but alive and victorious. Kang Ara looked at Chang Wu, who was coming down the hill. She looked at the defeated enemy, 12 children. She remembered each one, every name, every face. Her hand on the spear was motionless. One strike, one movement. Justice. Chang Wu approached, silently. He crouched down next to Gyum Chol. He opened his field kit, copper tweezers, scorched rags, boiled water in a leather flask. He began to examine the broken leg. Kangara watched him. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "He ate 12 of our children. I counted them." Chang-woo did not look up. He replied quietly, "I know. That is why he will live, and every day of his life he will walk our roads and look upon our fields. That is worse than death, and that will be the first law of our country. We do not kill those we can heal." Silence. The wind blew over the ford. The river carried red water southward. Bodies lay on the bank, our own and strangers. In the wagon train, Somira sewed up wounds and didn't stop. Kangara was silent for a long time. Then she knelt down next to Chang-woo. She handed him a clean cloth, silently. He took it. He continued working. Han Yuna stood to the side and wrote, a charcoal pencil on birch bark. "We do not kill those we can heal." The first line of the first law. Yoon Bi appeared out of nowhere. She stood off to the side with a pipe in her teeth and smiled, quietly, not cheerfully, like a person who has finally understood exactly what it is they have fallen in love with. The sun was setting over the ford. The day was ending. The war was ending. Something new was. After the battle, Hansel had changed. Not the walls and not the houses. The people had changed. They walked the streets differently. They spoke differently. They looked at each other differently. They had won. Together. Not a single clan. Not a single hero. All together. People who didn't know each other 2 years ago. People from different clans with different leaders and different customs. They stood shoulder to shoulder on the shore and didn't run. And that made them something new. Not a clan. Not an alliance of clans. A people. Choi Jium-chol lay in the infirmary. Somira was treating his leg. Silently. Without malice. Without pity. Professionally. She washed the wound, changed the splint, made sure it didn't get infected. Kyum-chol looked at her and didn't understand. In his world, the defeated were killed and eaten. The defeated were not treated. He asked once, "Why?" Somira answered without looking up from the wound, "Because we can." Kyum-chol fell silent, and remained silent for 3 days. Then he asked for water. He didn't demand it. He asked, "Please." Somira gave him water, and for a second their eyes met. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Confusion. A man whose worldview, not his leg, had been shattered. The Council of the 12 clans gathered a month after the battle. Not all 12. 10. 2 clans in the Far East had been destroyed by the Horde before the battle. But 10 came. 10 chiefs sat in a circle in Hansol Square. People stood around them. Hundreds. In silence. Waiting. Khan Taegu stood up first. He had aged over these 3 years. His beard had turned gray. His back was slightly bent. But his voice was strong. He spoke of the winter they had survived, of the battle they had won, about the city they had built, about the man who had come from nowhere and shown them things they did not know. Then he said, "Hansol must become the capital of the valley, and this man must become our king." Silence. Chang-woo stood in the circle and felt all eyes turn to him. Over 400 pairs of eyes. He shook his. Not a king. A king is just one man. One man dies and everything falls apart. We need a council. A council of people who know, who are capable, who can make decisions together. I will be the first among the counselors, not above you, with you. Han Taegu looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly, with something resembled relief, like a man who feared a friend would take on too much, and was glad that he hadn't. The council was formed within a week. 10 chieftains and 6 advisors. Chang-woo, first among the advisors. Kang Ara, commander of the army. Somira, head of medical affairs. Meng Sori, head of agriculture and supplies. Han Yuna, head of the schools. Yoon Bi. Her position had no title. She simply knew things, and that was enough. Park Do-hwan arrived in Hansol on the 3rd day after the council. Alone, without an entourage, without makeup. An ordinary old man in worn-out clothes. He walked slowly, his back was straight, but his step was heavy. The weight of the years and defeats bore down on him. The Council of Smoke had fallen apart after the battle. The shamans had scattered. Half of them had lost their influence within their clans. People who had seen bronze spears defeat stone axes didn't have much faith in the power of smoke and mutterings. Pak No-hye did not scatter. He came, so Mira saw him at the gate and stopped. They looked at each other, teacher and student. The man who had forbidden boiling water and the woman whose mother had died because of it. Pak No-hye approached her. He stopped. He was silent for a long time. Then he took his bosom his shaman staff, an old one, carved from mammoth bone, covered in symbols and notches, passed down from shaman to shaman for 10 generations. He held it out to So Mira. She didn't take it. She stood and watched. Pak No-hye placed the staff on the ground in front of her. Then he said, "When your mother was dying, I held her hand. Remember this when you teach others." So Mira was silent. Then she bent down. She picked up the staff. Not as a shamanic tool, as a memory, as something that connects the past with the future. Park No-hye nodded. He turned and walked away, toward the mountains, slowly, without looking back. So Mira stood and watched his back. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Chang-woo stood to the side and didn't approach. It was her moment, not his. Autumn of the 3rd year. Hansol became the capital. Roads were being built. Drainage ditches were working. Fields were yielding crops. The blacksmith's forge was working. The school was teaching. The infirmary was treating patients. Everything Chang-woo had planned while lying by the stove at night during that first winter was working. Not perfectly, with mistakes, with failures, with breakdowns that had to be fixed on the fly, but it worked. One evening, Mengsori came to him with a harvest report. She had written everything down on birch bark in neat letters she had learned at Han Yun's school. The 3 fields yielded enough barley to last the whole winter with a surplus. The goats they had been raised for 2 years, had given their first milk. Sour, but milk. The fish in the ponds they'd dug by the river grew on their own. Salt supplies for 3 months, enough dried meat to last 2. Chang-woo listened and looked at her face, rosy, radiant. She spoke of sacks and pots and harvests with the same passion with which other people speak of love. And for her, that was love. Love for the land that was finally giving back rather than just taking. When she finished her report, she looked at him and blushed, because he was looking at her, not at the birch bark scroll, at her. She lowered her eyes, then raised them, and she said quietly, "My father says I must find a husband." Chang-woo blinked. Mengsori blushed even more. She stood up, shoved the scroll into his hands, and walked away at a brisk pace, almost running. Chang-woo sat with the birch bark scroll in his hands and thought that the world of primitive people was surprisingly similar to his own. Women are always faster than men, in everything. 6 months had passed since the battle at the ford. Winter was receding. This was Chang-woo's 3rd winter in this world, and the first he faced not with anxiety, but with confidence. There were enough supplies, the people were fed, the children were healthy, the city stood. He walked through Hansol early in the morning, smoke from the chimneys, the smell of bread from the bakery that Mengsori had set up by the market, the clang of a hammer from the smithy where the apprentice Toru was forging nails. Yes, nails, small bronze pins that hold planks together better than ropes. Children were running to school, barefoot despite the cold. Han Yuna stood at the door and counted heads. 32 students. Everyone was there. She nodded to Chang-woo, seriously, like an adult. She was 11. In his world, she was still a child. Here, she was a teacher. Kang-ara stood at the Hansol gate talking to the guard. She saw Chang-woo and nodded. Briefly, the way people nod to one another. Chang-woo nodded back. There were no unnecessary words between them. There never were. Kang-ara spoke with her spear and her actions, and with a silence that was worth more than any words. By the well, So Mira was drawing water for the infirmary. Her students carried the pots. So Mira looked up and smiled at him. The quiet smile of a person who has found their place in the world and seeks no more. Around her neck hung the shamanic staff of Pak No-hye, wrapped in clean cloth. Not as a symbol of power, as a reminder. Mangsori was already in the barn. She was counting. She was always counting. Chang Wu heard her voice through the wall. She was dictating numbers to a student who was writing them down on birch bark. Her voice was steady and warm, the voice of a person doing what they love. He hadn't seen Yoonbi. He had never seen Yoonbi when she didn't want to be seen, but he knew she was somewhere nearby. She knows what needs to be known. She does what needs to be done. He reached the city wall. He climbed the rampart. He looked down at the valley. The rivers glistened in the sun. The fields darkened along the banks, ready for spring planting. The forest stood like a wall on the horizon. The mountains to the east were white with snow. Beautiful. So beautiful it took his breath away. He stood and looked and thought about how, 2.5 years ago, he had lain naked by the stream and who someone had poked him with a spear. And here it was, the town, the roads, the fields, the school, the smithy, the law. 400 living people who hadn't lost a single child this winter. He hadn't built an empire. He had built a place where specific people he knew by name could avoid dying the way their mothers had. He heard footsteps behind him, light, quick, unfamiliar. He turned around. A woman was climbing the rampart, tall, with reddish hair tied back with a leather strap. Her clothes were foreign, not the skins of the valley, something else. Fabric, rough, but fabric. And the cut was unfamiliar. She was dirty, exhausted. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. But she walked straight and confidently, like someone who had searched for a long time and finally found what they were looking for. She stopped 3 steps away from Chang Wu. She looked at him. He looked at her. And he couldn't understand why his heart was beating so fast. Then she spoke, in Korean, with a slight accent. Lee Chang-woo, bioengineer, Institute of Advanced Life Support Systems, Seoul, went missing in 2094 during an accident in a cryochamber. Chang-woo stood motionless. Korean. He hadn't heard Korean in 2.5 years. The sounds were familiar and foreign at the same time, like a voice from a dream. The woman continued. My name is Emily Cross. I'm an ethnographer. I worked in the same lab. 3 years after you, I found the documents. The program was called SEED. You ended up in it by accident. I ended up in it on purpose. Chang Wu opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His engineer's brain, which had functioned flawlessly for 2.5 years in the Stone Age, suddenly shut down. Because standing before him was a person from his world, from his time, a person who spoke his language and knew his name. He asked hoarsely, "How did you get here?" She replied, "The same way you did, only I knew where I was going, and to whom." She took a step closer. Her eyes were gray, tired, but something burned in them that Chang Wu recognized. He saw it in the mirror every day. The stubbornness of a person who had decided to do the impossible and would not stop. She said, "I walked for 4 months, across the steppe, through the mountains, alone. I knew you were here, knew you were alive, knew you were building something. Didn't know it was this big." She looked at the city behind him, at the houses, at the chimneys, at the road, at the children running to school, and her lips trembled, for a second. Then she pressed them together and pulled herself together. Chang Wu asked, "What kind of program? What is the SEED?" Emily paused. Then she said, "It's a long story, a very long one, and you won't like everything about it. But the short version is this. We're not on Earth, not on our Earth. This is a parallel world. Humanity here is nearly extinct. Someone, something, a civilization that went to the stars. They restarted humanity here, in the Stone Age. And once every few thousand years, they send a person from the advanced branch here, one, to see if he can lift up the locals, gently, without breaking them. You're not the first. There were 2 before you. One declared himself a god and was overthrown. The second withdrew into himself and drank himself to death. You're the third." Chan Wu listened. The wind blew in his face, a cold spring wind with the scent of wet earth and smoke. The city behind him went about its business. The clang of a hammer, children's voices, the creak of a gate, the sounds of the world he had built. He asked quietly, "Are they watching?" Emily nodded. "Yes, they're watching. They don't interfere, they just watch." Chang Wu was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Why are you telling me this?" Emily answered simply, "Because you deserve to know the truth, and because I don't want to be here alone, just as you didn't want to be alone 2 years ago." They stood side by side on the rampart, two people from the 21st century on the wall of a Stone Age city. Below, Toru was carrying an armful of firewood to the smithy. Kang Ada was sending out the sentries. Mira was giving a sick child boiled water to drink. Meng Sori was counting the sacks of grain. Han Yun was writing letter by letter on the blackboard. Yun Bi appeared at the gate, gave Emily a long, appraising look, and disappeared again. The world around them hadn't changed because of Emily's words. The city stood, people lived, the law held, knowledge was passed down. It doesn't matter who brought them here. It doesn't matter who is watching. What matters is that the children are alive, that a mother isn't burying her child this winter, that a woman is reading her name for the first time in her life and crying because it turns out her name has a form. Chang Wu looked at Emily and said, "Let's go. I'll show you the smithy. We need a printing press, wooden letters, a copper frame, a roller with soot ink. We have the first law, and it's time to print it." Emily looked at him. Then she laughed, briefly, hoarsely, like someone who hadn't laughed in a long time and had forgotten what it was supposed to sound like. They climbed down from the embankment and walked along the road toward the smithy, side by side, two engineers in a world that was just beginning. That night, they worked in an empty school. Chan Wu carved letters out of wood. Emily assembled a frame from copper strips. They hardly spoke. There was no need. Each knew what to do. The engineer's hands remembered the precision. When the frame was assembled and the letters laid out, Chang Wu applied soot ink to the roller. Emily placed a sheet of birch bark. He rolled the ink over the letters. He lifted the bark. The letters were imprinted, unevenly, with smudges, but legible. The first line, "We do not kill those we can heal." The first law. The first printed page in the history of this world. Emily silently placed her palm over his hand on the roller. Her hand was warm. There was no gratitude, no calculation, no pain in this touch. Just a hand on a hand. Two people from one world in another. Chang Wu didn't move his hand. Outside the school walls, Hansol slept. Quiet, warm, alive. Smoke rose from the chimneys into the night sky. The stars hung low and bright. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a white river. Somewhere up there, maybe someone really was watching. Chang Wu raised his head and looked at the stars, then back at the birch bark with the first law, then at Emily, then at his own hands. Hands that 2.5 years ago had been the hands of a lab engineer, and now were the hands of a man who had built a city. He hadn't built an empire. He hadn't intended to. He had built a place where Toru could forge nails without fearing he'd be killed tomorrow, where Somira could heal and know her knowledge would outlive her, where Mei and Sori could count grain and take pride in her land, where Kang Ara could defend and know that her hands were good for more than just killing, where Han Yuna could teach and be not a rescued girl but a teacher, where Yun Bi could finally stop selling and start building, where Emily could come from another world and find not a foreign land but a home. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if the valley would survive the next climate change. He didn't know if the bone faces would return. He didn't know what those watching from the stars had in mind. But he knew one thing. Tomorrow morning he would get up. He would go to the stove. He would light the fire. And he would start working. Because a bridge is built one support at a time.